Chapter 56. After returning to Mount Yunwu, Mo Tiange officially entered closed-door meditation. Aside from going back to see second uncle every half a month, she no longer went out for a stroll. Occasionally, when she came out of closed-door meditation, she would find summoning talismans from Murong Yan, Wang Qianyi, and even Shenbing. Originally, she didn't have any friendship with them, but after the trip to Miwu Valley, they became closer. When they learned that she was cultivating in closed-door meditation, they all came to greet her. Shenbing and Wang Qianyi even said that if she needed any help, she could just ask. Mo Tiange knew it wasn't appropriate for her to have too much contact with them, so she only responded politely and didn't ask for anything. Every time she came out and ran into the other senior martial brothers living with her, she was laughed at. Su Jingji was even more envious and jealous. He said that although she looked good, her skinny appearance didn't look like a man at all. She obviously wasn't as tall, handsome, and elegant as him, so why were the famous beautiful senior martial sisters in the sect so good to her? Mo Tiange smiled bitterly in her heart, feeling even more distressed. Men and women were different. She increasingly felt that pretending to be a man was getting more and more tiring. If her cultivation level was high, she could directly use the illusory technique and pretend to be whatever she wanted. However, she was just a small aura refining cultivator. If she wanted to use the illusory technique to deceive high-level cultivators, wasn't that just courting death? 2 years passed in a flash. Although she grew a little taller, it was very little. She wasn't considered tall among women, let alone among men. Lu Yidao was a head taller than her, Qin Shi was a head taller, and even Su Jingji, who wasn't considered tall, was half a head taller than her. Perhaps it was because she was too unlucky. The men in the room were all tall, making her look even thinner. Coupled with her thin shoulders and thin body, even though she had been dressing as a woman for many years and no longer looked like a woman, she was still very eye-catching. Su Jingji laughed at her more than once, saying that she looked like a man but looked like a woman. Although it didn't arouse anyone's suspicion, it gave Mo Tiange a wake-up call and constantly reminded her to be careful. 2 years later, when she ran out of spirit stones, she finally reached the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. At this time, Yinwu Sect's minor competition was about to begin. Therefore, she left closed-door meditation after her realm stabilized. As soon as she came out, the other 3 were already waiting in the small hall. In the past 3 years, Lu Yidao and Qin Shi's cultivation levels had become even more exquisite. Although Su Jingji was a bit inferior, he also rushed into the 9th layer of the aura refining realm and wasn't far from the 10th layer. In order to celebrate her coming out of seclusion, the group decided to go sightseeing and have a picnic. More than once, Murong Yan expressed that she missed her roasted beast meat, so she also sent a summoning talisman to invite her. Since she was invited, she naturally invited Wang Qianyi and Shenbing as well. At the same time, she also notified senior martial brother Zhou. Originally, Mo Tiange thought that although Murong Yan would definitely come, Shenbing and Wang Qianyi might not necessarily come, let alone senior martial brother Zhou. Who would have thought that not a single one would be missing? The group of people chatted and barbecued by the waterfall pool on the southern peak. Mo Tiange sat by the water's edge, struggling to skewer a row of beast meat. She used the fire spiritual art with her left hand and spread flames on the beast meat. Not far away, under a tree, there was a piece of linen cloth with tea and snacks on it. On the side, Lu Yidao and senior martial brother Zhou were exchanging cultivation insights. Su Jingji was sitting next to Shenbing and Wang Qian to join in on the fun. Qin Shi was lazily leaning against a tree, basking in the sun. Murong Yan was sitting next to her, staring at the skewers while drooling. From time to time, she would ask if they were done. This group of people said they were celebrating her reaching the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, but in the end, they said that her barbecuing skills were pretty good, so they just let her do the barbecuing for everyone. Alas! When she finally finished barbecuing a batch, she wiped her sweat, then placed it on a tray and handed it to Morong-yen. "It's done. Call them over to eat." There was no need for anyone to call them. Once they saw that Emo-tienge had finished barbecuing, those people who were originally very leisurely swarmed over like a swarm of bees. Each of them took a handful and gorged themselves. After Su Jingji finished gnawing on the meat in his hand, he shouted, "It's really delicious. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, give me a few more pieces." Emo-tienge, who had just washed her hands by the waterfall, rolled her eyes when she heard what he said. "If you light the fire, I'll barbecue it for you." Su Jingji scratched his head. "Light the fire. But I don't have fire spiritual roots, so I can't use fire spells." The group of people laughed. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou said, "Junior Marshal Brother Ye's cooking skills are really good. It's much better than the ones in our dining hall." Morong-yen nodded repeatedly. "Yeah, I haven't eaten it for 2 years. I've been craving it to death." Lu Yidao rubbed his belly. "This little bit isn't enough. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, barbecue more." Emo-tienge sighed. "Someone come and light the fire for me, okay? My fire spells are really not that good. I'm really tired after doing it for half a day." Morong-yen hastily said, "I also don't have fire spiritual roots. How about I use talismans? I have several fire talismans here. We can't waste them like this." Su Jingji immediately interjected, "Senior Marshal Brother Qin is the best at fire spells. Senior Marshal Brother Qin, come and help me." Ever since this brat met his 3 senior martial sisters, he was extremely attentive. Needless to say, he always called Shenbing and Wang Qianyi senior martial sister. His mouth seemed to be smeared with honey. Emo-tienge shook her head and smiled. She saw Qin-shi's helpless expression, but she didn't refuse. She stood up and dusted off her sleeves, then walked over. "That'll do. I won't eat for free. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, please tell me what you want." Emo-tienge naturally wouldn't be polite. Qin-shi majored in fire spells, so he wasn't half as good as her. She took out a thin blade, cut the beast meat piece by piece and strung it with a tree branch. She then said to Qin-shi, "Senior Marshal Brother Qin, don't burn it too fiercely. If you burn the tree branch, it'll be a waste." Qin-shi nodded and placed his right palm on the meat. Flames suddenly appeared and soon, the aroma of meat drifted out. Emo-tienge saw that the situation wasn't good, so she hastily said, "Senior Marshal Brother Qin, slow down." She hadn't seasoned the meat yet and hadn't turned the meat over yet, she didn't want it to be burnt. Alas, it's not good to have a powerful fire spell. It's not convenient to control the heat. However, with Qin-shi's help, the roasting was a lot faster. Before long, the roasted meat was piled up to the brim, and the 2 of them finally stopped. "Okay, this should be enough for you, right?" Emo-tienge tidied up the food and pushed the tray to Morong-yen. This plate of meat was half a spiritual deer. Morong-yen cheered, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you're the best." By the time she finished washing her face and went back, there was only half a plate of meat left on the plate. Qin-shi leaned against a tree and said with a smile, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you should drink some tea and eat some snacks. This plate. I think it's enough for them." Emo-tienge rolled her eyes. They roasted the meat for a long time, but she still couldn't eat it. Lu Yidao laughed and patted her shoulder. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, who told you to be so good at cooking? Capable people do more work." Good, good, good. I really owe you guys." In any case, she could already abstain from eating, so she didn't like to eat as much as before. After eating the roasted meat, they chatted while drinking tea. The topic of their conversation couldn't deviate from the group's minor competition that was going to happen soon. Generally, there were minor competitions and major competitions in cultivation groups. The major competition was usually held once every several decades or even once every century. Cultivators in the ore refining, foundation building, and core formation realms would participate. However, only ore refining disciples participated in the minor competition, and it was held once every 10 years or less. Although the rewards of the major competition were generous, it was too far away from them. Ore refining disciples usually paid more attention to the minor competition because it was related to the distribution of foundation building pills. Among them, Su Jingji and Murong Yan were in the 9th layer of the ore refining realm, senior martial brother Zhou was in the 11th layer, and the others were in the 10th layer. Aside from senior martial brother Zhou, everyone else had to participate in the minor competition. Only by participating in the minor competition could they obtain foundation building pills. Only with foundation building pills could they build their foundation. However, they were only a medium-sized cultivation group. Every 10 years, 20 to 30 foundation building pills would be distributed, and only about 10% of them would succeed. Among them, aside from senior martial brother Zhou, who would definitely advance to the foundation building realm, it was hard to say what would happen to the others. Among several hundred people, it was already difficult to fight for a spot, let alone obtaining a foundation building pill. In fact, taking foundation building pills wasn't the only way to build one's foundation. It was just that ordinary people didn't even need to think about the other methods. Taking ancient spiritual panaceas, pouring spiritual aura into one's body through a secret technique by a high-level nascent soul cultivator, or obtaining other fated chances that suddenly poured a large amount of spiritual aura into one's body could allow one to make a breakthrough in their realm. How could these methods be thought of by ordinary cultivators like them? Only foundation establishment pills could have any hope of doing so. The more they talked about this topic, the heavier it became. In the end, everyone lost interest in talking, so they simply ended the gathering and went back to their respective places. Mo Tianga's heart was heavy. Although she had advanced to the 10th layer and had a 50% chance of obtaining a spot, she didn't even have a 10% chance of successfully building her foundation. She didn't forget that she had 5 spiritual roots. Mo family's ancestor, Mo Yaoqing, once said that she didn't have ordinary 5 spiritual roots and that she had the spiritual roots of the origin, an average of 5 spiritual roots. She inherited it from another ancestor. If she had a specific cultivation technique, the cultivation speed of someone with the spiritual roots of the origin wouldn't be slow. However, after entering the cultivation world for so long, she and second uncle had searched through all the books and records, yet they still didn't know anything about the spiritual roots of the origin. 2 years ago, second uncle said he only had 2 to 3 years left in his lifespan. Now, 2 years had passed, and she had smoothly advanced to the 10th layer of the aura refining realm. However, she discovered that the path to immortality was vague, and the path to building her foundation was still far from her. Chapter 57. Not long after, the Stewards' Hall announced the date of the minor competition, and senior martial brother Zhou brought specific information. The minor competition of aura refining cultivators in the 7th layer and above could register. In this minor competition, the top 30 would receive a foundation building pill as a reward, as well as spirit stones and so on. Everyone looked happy when they heard the news. The top 30 would receive a reward. It seemed the sex pill concocting this time went very smoothly. Although the foundation building pill wasn't an ancient miraculous medicine, its materials weren't common. Usually, the sect would spend several years to concoct one furnace of pills, and the success rate of this furnace would affect the rewards of the minor competition. When luck was bad, there would only be about 10 finished pills from one furnace. After deducting the quota for 11th and 12th layer aura refining disciples, as well as some reserved for disciples with great contributions, the rest would be the rewards of the minor competition. In this way, only the top 10 would receive a reward. But this time, the top 30 would receive a reward. Their luck was really good. The minor competition was also a ring competition, but after drawing lots, they would fight each other in pairs. The winner would advance until the first place was decided. Therefore, this kind of competition made many people feel lucky. If the opponent they drew wasn't strong, it would be easy for them to get a high ranking. However, entering the top 50 basically couldn't rely on luck. There were about 400 cultivators in the 7th layer and above, and after 3 rounds of competition, only those who entered the top 50 would enter the top 50. Aura refining disciples in the 7th layer and above began to prepare one after another. For a while, the prices of talismans, medicinal pills, and spirit tools increased by 2 times compared to usual. Mo Tiange rejoiced that she was prepared long ago. Otherwise, she wouldn't have any money to buy things. The spirit stones she had were almost used up during her 2 years of closed-door meditation. This time, second uncle prepared a lot of talismans and medicinal pills for her. When she found out, she discovered that second uncle sold some of his belongings. Because of this, Mo Tiange secretly made up her mind. Even if it was for second uncle, she had to obtain the foundation building pill. Soon after, senior martial brother Zhou brought another piece of news. Zixia sect invited the 3 groups to hold a minor competition together to motivate their disciples. This wasn't the first time in the history of the 3 groups. In the past, the 3 groups indeed held a minor competition together, but this was the first time they held one together with such a huge difference in strength. For this reason, Jindao School's school head Jin wasn't happy about it. In the end, Zixia sect school head Li proposed that Zixia sect take out some foundation building pills as the reward for the overall ranking. As for the rewards for the internal ranking of the 3 groups, the 3 groups would distribute them among themselves. This made Jin Zhangmen feel a little more comfortable. Even if no disciple of Jindao School received the reward, they wouldn't lose anything. It was just that they would lose face. However, if they refused, they would become a laughing stock, and people would gossip that the Jindao School was weak and timid. Therefore, they could only bite the bullet and agree, hoping that 1 or 2 disciples could live up to expectations. She couldn't understand Zixia sect's purpose. Although Zixia sect expressed that they would only take out 10 foundation building pills, these 10 foundation building pills could possibly add 1 or 2 foundation building cultivators to their sect. Was it really necessary to make such a contribution just to save face? While the 4 of them were chatting in the small living room, Jiang Shanghang, who rarely came out, snorted coldly when he heard what Mo Tiange said. It'll look good on your face, so it'll be much easier for you to recruit disciples with good aptitudes in the future. In the long run, the benefits will be much greater than having 1 or 2 foundation building cultivators. Everyone was silent. Although no one liked Jiang Shanghang, he was still a disciple of Jiang clan, so the way he looked at things was very different from them. What he said was also very reasonable. If they became famous, in the future, all the children with spiritual roots in this area would go to Zixia sect first, and they would be able to pick those with good aptitudes first. If a few of them had single or mutated spiritual roots, in the future, the gap between them and the other 2 groups would only grow bigger and bigger. This wasn't something that 1 or 2 foundation building cultivators could pull back. After he finished speaking, Jiang Shanghang once again returned to his room. In the past few years, he still ignored everyone and only focused on cultivating. Now, he only lacked foundation building pills, so it seemed he was determined to win this minor competition. Su Jingji stared at the door of Jiang Shanghang's room and asked the 3 people in amazement, "Did you guys see that? Senior martial brother Jiang actually talked to us. Is that true?" His tone made Mo Tiange laugh. It's not like senior martial brother Jiang doesn't talk to us. It was just that his tone wasn't very good and he didn't talk to us too often. Qin Shi, who was drawing talismans on the table, raised his head. Junior martial brother Su, are you ready? This question touched Su Jingji's sore spot. With a bitter expression, he said, no, my big brother also wants to participate in the minor competition. My clan supports him, so I can only make do with some talismans. In any case, it's better than us. Lu Yidao stopped cultivating and said, you still have your clan's support. We, on the other hand, are genuine individual cultivators with no one to rely on. Aside from the sect supplies, we don't have anything else. Su Jingji jumped up and shouted, Senior Martial Brother Lu, you're still talking. Last time, in Miwu Valley's competition, how many rewards did you get? Lu Yidao scratched his head. It's been 2 years, yet Junior Martial Brother Su still remembers? Su Jingji snorted. Of course I didn't get anything. Otherwise, I would have advanced to the 10th layer like Junior Martial Brother Yi. I really don't want to call Junior Martial Brother Yi Martial Uncle in the future. How could it be that easy? Mo Tiange sighed. Senior Martial Brother Su, it's not like you don't know that I have 5 spiritual roots. Being able to cultivate to the 10th layer of the aura refining realm is already my good fortune. As for advancing to the foundation building realm, how many cultivators with 5 spiritual roots can successfully advance to the foundation building realm? At this point, Su Jingji also shook his head and smiled bitterly. Although I have 4 spiritual roots, my cultivation has always been mediocre, so I could only enter the sect through the Immortals Assembly. I, Junior Martial Brother Yi, being able to cultivate to this stage with 5 spiritual roots. You're indeed better than me. The two of them looked at each other and sighed, making the atmosphere very depressing. Qin Shi, who was still concentrating on drawing talismans, said, although aptitude is important, it's not the only thing. Some nascent soul cultivators aren't geniuses with single or mutated spiritual roots. More than half of them have double or even 3 spiritual roots. Mo Tiange had never heard of this before. Why is that? Qin Shi flicked his finger, burning the broken talisman. He then glanced at her and said, cultivators with single or mutated spiritual roots can advance through the realms very quickly and easily advance to the core formation realm. However, it's precisely because of this that their temperaments aren't firm enough, so they haven't been tested by their inner demons. Once they reach the nascent soul realm, aptitude doesn't play much of a role, but temperaments do. They can easily cultivate to the peak stage of the core formation realm, but they often fail at the inner demons during the nascent soul realm. On the other hand, it's not easy for cultivators with double or 3 spiritual roots to cultivate to the core formation realm. They usually have to go through trials, but their willpower is firm. When they reach the nascent soul realm, their lifespans are usually more than half, and their temperaments and experiences can withstand the trials. Therefore, although it's not easy for them to cultivate, it's much safer for them to form their nascent soul. The other 3 people had never heard of this before, so they were all amazed. So doesn't that mean cultivators with double or 3 spiritual roots are better? Why doesn't the sect attach importance to them? Qin Shi raised the corners of his mouth, looking like he was smiling. Now, he also smiled occasionally, so he looked a bit more human compared to when he first arrived. That being said, how many people have single or mutated spiritual roots? Although double spiritual roots are a bit rare, triple spiritual roots are everywhere. A cultivation group has 5,000 aura refining disciples, but there might only be 2 or 3 with single or mutated spiritual roots, 4 to 500 with double spiritual roots, and more than 4,000 with triple spiritual roots. As long as there are no accidents, these 2 or 3 people with single or mutated spiritual roots will advance to the core formation realm. However, among these 4,000 people with double or mutated spiritual roots, only about 10 people will advance to the core formation realm. If they form their nascent soul, the former is half, while the latter might not even have one. Speaking up to this point, even he sighed. The path to the nascent soul realm is indeed much more difficult than we imagined. Those with good aptitudes can smoothly advance to the core formation realm even if they don't have enough comprehension and effort. Those with poor aptitudes, not to mention the nascent soul realm, even reaching the core formation realm requires several times the effort. Once he finished speaking, the other three people sank into silence. After a long time, Louis Dao finally said, "Not to mention the core formation realm and the nascent soul realm, even building our foundation is a problem for us." Yes, Su Jingji said, among more than 400 aura refining disciples, perhaps only 2 or 3 will advance to the foundation building realm. I wonder if any of us will be able to move to the North Peak next year. Chapter 58. The Greenwood Sword, the talisman's second uncle prepared, seeds, spirit stones, healing medicinal pills, and several simple formations. When she finished checking everything, Su Jingji knocked on the door. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, are you done?" Mo Tiange answered, "I'm coming." In the courtyard outside the house, all the cultivators gathered together. Except for Senior Marshal Brother Zhou, everyone looked more or less nervous. They all entered the sect through the Immortals' Assembly. Their cultivation levels weren't weak, but they couldn't obtain foundation building pills. It could be said that they all entered the sect for the sake of foundation building pills. Mo Tiange was no exception. As individual cultivators, their biggest difficulty wasn't lacking spirit veins and medicinal pills, but not being able to obtain foundation building pills. If spirit veins weren't good, they could make do. If they lacked medicinal pills, they could slowly earn money to buy them. With enough opportunities and diligence, reaching the 10th layer of the aura refining realm wouldn't be too difficult. However, individual cultivators had no way to obtain foundation building pills. Cultivation groups and clans that had the ability to concoct foundation building pills basically wouldn't sell them. Only under some special circumstances would they sell them. Even so, their prices were still sky high. Every time they were sold for several thousand spirit stones, they simply couldn't be afforded by ordinary cultivators. Therefore, only by entering a sect would they have the opportunity to obtain foundation building pills and possibly build their foundation. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou glanced at them and said, "I don't need to tell you how important today is. I think you all know it. Your future depends on your hard work today. Let's go." The venue of the minor competition was finally set at Zixia sect. No one was surprised by this result. Since Zixia sect deliberately wanted to show off, the result was bound to be like this. Yunwu sect, Zixia sect, and Jindao school were the 3 great cultivation groups in the eastern region of Kunwu. The 3 groups depended on each other and also restrained each other, maintaining a subtle relationship. In the past, there had been cases where one group was particularly powerful. Usually, at that time, that group would become the leader of the 3 groups. Judging from the current situation, Zixia sect was obviously pursuing this position. However, this had nothing to do with young aura refining disciples like them. No matter what happened to the higher-ups, they just needed to cultivate well and wouldn't be implicated. On the day of the minor competition, sect leader Fong appeared in front of everyone again. This time, he was even more cautious than during the competition in Miwu Valley. There were 5 core formation cultivators. In the entire Yunwu sect, there were only 7 or 8 core formation cultivators in total. Most of them, excluding those who were in closed-door meditation, were all here. Mo Tiange frowned inwardly. Apparently, this minor competition was just a name. Most likely, it was a competition between the 3 groups in private. It should be known that core formation cultivators normally wouldn't appear in front of ordinary disciples. They would only be able to see the sect head during events like joining the sect or the Miwu Valley competition. However, this was only a minor competition. It would be fine if it was just like the Miwu Valley competition, but there were actually 5 core formation cultivators accompanying them. It was clear that this wasn't a simple competition. It would take about 6 hours to travel from Yunwu sect to Zixia sect on a core formation grandmaster's flying magic weapon, which was a bit further than Miwu Valley. By the time they arrived at Zixia sect, all the Yunwu sect disciples felt like their horizons had been broadened. Zixia sect was situated on top of a high mountain. This mountain was thousands of feet high and towered into the clouds. Neat and tidy jade steps stretched from the foot of the mountain all the way to the magnificent mountain gate. After that, there was a vast square and a lofty main hall. Looking down from the sky, Missouri Tiange had to admit that compared to Zixia sect's grandeur, Yunwu sect seemed a bit small. Zixia sect square was more than twice the size of Yunwu sect's. All the aura refining disciples participating in the minor competition were in the square, but it didn't feel crowded at all. Several fighting rings were neatly placed in the middle of the square. The disciples of the 3 groups each occupied a corner. Jindao School had the least number of disciples compared to last time. The number of Yunwu sect's disciples increased slightly, but Zixia sect's disciples were obviously the most numerous. The right side of the fighting ring was densely packed. After that, the disciples of the 3 groups drew lots. The total number of people was more than 1,000, so the time taken to draw lots was very long. Mo Tiange inadvertently raised her head and saw that the sect heads of the 3 groups weren't present. None of the core formation cultivators were present either. She confirmed her guess. It seemed today was indeed a competition between the 3 groups, and Zixia sect wanted to suppress the other 2 groups. The preliminary round of the minor competition began under the arrangement of the foundation building cultivators. The number Mo Tiange drew was number 347, which was in the middle. It was neither good nor bad. This time, they came together. After drawing lots, they went to their respective fighting rings. Mo Tiange's first opponent was number 348, an 8th layer aura refining disciple of Zixia sect. Her opponent's cultivation level wasn't high, and his magical power was also ordinary. Under her greenwood sword's attack, he admitted defeat in less than a quarter of an hour. She jumped off the fighting ring, feeling somewhat absent-minded. She didn't know why, but she felt restless ever since she arrived at Zixia sect. The first round of the competition ended one after another. Just as the foundation building cultivators were about to discuss how to proceed with the second round of the competition, a hall of Zixia sect not far from them suddenly collapsed with a loud rumble, emitting blazing flames. The aura refining disciples in the square were in an uproar, and the foundation building cultivators' expressions changed greatly. From the ruins of that hall, several silhouettes rushed out. Each of them had a defensive magic barrier over their heads as they fought. They were obviously high-level cultivators. The spiritual aura pressure produced by their fights of magical power was extremely great, making it difficult for the aura refining disciples to bear. Upon seeing this scene, a foundation-building cultivator from Yunwu sect suddenly raised his voice and shouted, "Yunwu sect's disciples, come here." The cultivators from Jindao School came to their senses and also shouted, "Jindao School's disciples, come here." The aura refining disciples didn't understand what was going on, so they obeyed out of habit. In an instant, the square was thrown into chaos. The cultivators who were mixed together ran here and there, trampling on others from time to time. Amidst the chaos, Mo Tiange saw several familiar figures among the cultivators fighting with magical powers. Yunwu sect head Fang Dingyue, Zixia sect head Li, and Jindao School's sect head Jin were nowhere to be seen. Apparently, the 3 groups had a falling out. It was no wonder she felt restless just now. Those who studied formations were more sensitive to yin, yang, and the 5 elements, so they could occasionally sense bad luck. This was really bad. This was Zixua's sect, and she was only an aura-refining disciple with meager strength. If Yunwu's sect and Jindao school really had a falling out with Zixua's sect, aura-refining disciples like her would be in danger. Mo Tianga's face turned pale when she thought about this. Li Mingzhang. You old fool. You actually plotted against me. Flying in the air, Sect Head Fong pointed at Sect Head Li and cursed loudly. Sect Head Li smiled lightly. Fong Dingyue, now that things have come to this, you'd better admit defeat. As he spoke, he cast a glance at the square. If you admit defeat, I'll leave some incense for your Yunwu sect today. Otherwise, these future pillars of Yunwu's sect will all be gone. Although his tone was flat, the threat was obvious. Sect Head Fong immediately bristled with anger and sneered repeatedly. Don't be complacent. If I explode my gold core, your Zixia sect won't be able to keep its incense. When a gold core cultivator detonated his gold core, even a nascent soul cultivator would be injured. If Sect Head Fong was ruthless enough to destroy indiscriminately, perhaps not a single disciple from the 3 groups would survive in the square. Mo Tianga's palms suddenly broke out in cold sweat. She couldn't be that unlucky, could she? If she died in the internal strife between the 3 groups before even building her foundation, she'd really die with everlasting regret. Sect Head Li's expression remained unchanged. He smiled contemptuously and said, Do you think we didn't guard against you when we dared to attack you? You might as well use your spiritual aura. Sect Head Fong's complexion suddenly turned blue. You dare to exterminate my Yunwu sect. Aren't you afraid that Elder Yen will come back and become hostile? Elder Yen was the Grand Supreme Elder of Yunwu's sect, the only nascent soul grandmaster in Yunwu's sect. Sect Head Li snorted. Do you think we don't know? Your Elder Yen passed away 10 years ago, he just didn't dare to make it public. Once he said that, not only did Sect Head Fong's complexion turn pale, but all the Yunwu sect disciples in the square were also shocked. This matter was obviously Yunwu sect's top secret. Not to mention ordinary disciples like them, even foundation-building disciples didn't know about it. It seemed Zixia sect's move had been planned for a long time. Mo Tiange hid in the crowd, trying hard to think about the current situation. Since she was in Zixia sect, it was impossible for her to escape by herself. She could only wait and see how these people would deal with the Yunwu sect disciples. They couldn't possibly kill all of them, right? The more she thought about it, the more cold sweat covered her forehead. Second uncle was still waiting for her to bring back foundation building pills. Who would have thought this was actually a trap? Chapter 59. The people in the square didn't know what happened in the main hall, but they all saw the result. When they heard Zixia sect's Sect Head Li's order, Sect Head Fong was immediately beaten down. No one knew what they did to him, but he couldn't resist at all. The other core formation cultivators were nowhere to be seen. It was unclear whether they fell into a trap or were persuaded. Core formation cultivators cherished their lives very much. Even if their sect was destroyed, they might not necessarily be willing to risk their lives. Sect Head Fong was, after all, the sect head of a sect. He also knew that with his status, it wouldn't be good for Yunwu's sect to be destroyed, so he risked his life to resist. Now that Sect Head Fong was defeated and obviously wouldn't be spared, the Yunwu sect disciples in the square were all frightened and scared. Fong Dingyue, die in peace. Today, our Zixia sect will merge with the other 3 groups and from now on, will be the 8th great cultivation group. Ha 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 ha. Amidst the laughter, Sect Head Fong fell to the ground with a loud bang. A sorrowful and indignant shout came from the Yunwu sect disciples. Sect head Li turned his head. Ruthlessness flashed in his eyes as he waved his sleeve. Instantly, that person screamed and fell to the ground. Mo Tiange turned her head and saw the foundation building cultivator lying on the ground. His eyes were wide open, as if he died with a grievance. There was a bloody hole in his body, and blood was gurgling out. At this time, she heard a mournful shout, "Father!" It was Wang Qinyi. The dead foundation building cultivator was her father, Wang Qiao. Although Wang Qinyi had a foundation building cultivator as her father, she never showed off. Usually, she only said she was Wang Qiao's disciple. This was the first time she called him that in front of outsiders. Mo Tiange looked worriedly at Sect Head Li, who was still in the air. Fortunately, Sect Head Li didn't want to kill him since he saw he was just an aura refining cultivator. Under this ruthlessness, none of the Yunwu sect disciples dared to move. Several foundation building cultivators were trembling with fear. They didn't expect Li Mingzhong to be so cruel and merciless. Wang Qiao was killed right after he shouted. Sect Head Li seemed very satisfied when he saw the silence below. He even smiled. Disciples, as you can see, Yunwu sect is removed from East Kunwu from now on. If you join Zixia sect, you'll receive the same treatment as before, maybe even better. Otherwise. He glanced at the square and his gaze stopped on Wang Qiao's corpse. His meaning couldn't be more obvious. Under such a combination of carrots and carrots, Yunwu sect's aura refining disciples and several foundation building disciples didn't dare to move in the slightest. All of them acquiesced to this result. Sect leader Li grunted with satisfaction and turned to the disciples of Jindao school. You don't have to take any chances. Now that Jindao school leader can't move, you're at our mercy. Your Jindao school is the same as Yunwu sect. From today onwards you'll belong to my Zixia sect. If there's anyone who doesn't accept, With Yunwu sect as an example, no one in Jindao school dared to make a move. Right now, Zixia sect was really too powerful. Even if the two groups joined forces, it still wouldn't be enough to fight against them, let alone now that all the golden core cultivators were trapped by them. At this moment, several people flew out from the ruins of the main hall. Some were carrying, some were dead, and some were alive. They were the core formation cultivators from Yunwu sect and Jindao school. Most of them were already dead. A few of them were still alive, but they were still unconscious. She didn't know what method Zixia sect used to catch so many core formation cultivators in one fell swoop. Sect leader Li turned around and said to someone, "Brother Jiang, this time, it's all thanks to you. In the future, Zixia sect's Mount Yunwu branch will depend on you." The person he called Brother Jiang was a man who seemed to be in his 30s. He wore a yellow robe, and on his cuffs, there were several clouds embroidered. This was the symbol of Yunwu sect. The man looked very indifferent as he said, "How can I disobey the sect leader's order?" From his words, he already regarded sect leader Li as the head of the three groups. Sect leader Li seemed to be very satisfied with his answer and laughed. Obviously, this cultivator's surname Jiang was Yunwu sect spy. Mo Tiange didn't know what benefits Zixia sect promised him to make him betray his own sect. Most core formation cultivators were proud and arrogant. If they didn't promise great benefits, they wouldn't bear such infamy. At this moment, there was a commotion in Jindao school's camp. A core formation cultivator carried a person over and threw him in front of sect leader Li. Mo Tiange focused her gaze and saw that it was actually Jindao school's school leader Jean. At this moment, sect leader Li was very complacent. He stared at the ashen-faced school leader Jean and said with a smile, "Brother Jean, considering our many years of friendship, I'll give you another chance. How about Jindao school submit to my Zixia sect?" School leader Jean looked very angry. His whole body was in a sorry state. He turned to look at Jindao School's camp, then his gaze fell on the corpse on the side. After a long time, he finally sighed dejectedly. Do I have any other choice now? You're the knife, and I'm the meat. I can only let Brotherly make the decision. His words clearly showed that he had accepted his fate. Although everyone knew this, it was different when the sect leader personally said it. The disciples of Jindao School immediately gave up. The overall situation was set. Jindao School no longer existed. Sect leader Li revealed a satisfied smile. He raised his head and gazed into the distance. That'll do. Martial Uncle Qian has given his order. Since these people have been subdued, it's time to deal with the remaining problems. Remaining problems. For a moment, Mo Tiange was puzzled. However, she saw sect leader Li give an order, leaving a core formation cultivator here. He then led everyone away, taking school leader Jean with him. It was only when their flight lights disappeared into the horizon that the aura-refining disciples in the square heaved sighs of relief. The spiritual aura pressure from so many core formation cultivators was really hard for them to bear. As soon as they left, the disciples of Zishia's sect were already talking and laughing happily. They naturally didn't know about such an important matter beforehand. However, they were naturally happy to see their sect annexing the other two cultivation groups and becoming the biggest cultivation group in this area. In contrast, the disciples of Yunwu's sect and Jindao School were all dispirited and anxious. Although sect leader Li wanted them to submit and not kill them, they were the ones who were annexed after all. Who knew what would happen in the future? Besides, most of them were disciples of cultivation clans attached to Yunwu's sect. They didn't know whether their clans would suffer a calamity because of this. If they did, their clans would be exterminated. The only remaining core formation cultivator was currently sitting cross-legged in the center of the square. Perhaps because the noise was too loud, he opened his eyes and shouted, "My sect's disciples can leave, but the disciples of Yunwu's sect and Jindao School are not allowed to leave even half a step." Once he said that, the square immediately became quiet. The disciples of Zishia's sect lowered their heads and left one after another. The disciples of the other two cultivation groups didn't dare to make any noise. Seeing that all the disciples of Zishia's sect had left in just a moment, the core formation cultivator once again closed his eyes and meditated. After a long time, seeing that the core formation cultivator wasn't paying any attention to them, the disciples of the two cultivation groups went to look for their relatives and friends to discuss the matter in low voices. Upon seeing this, Mo Tiange also quietly went to Wang Qian's place. Since Wang Qiao's death, Wang Qianni had been holding her father's corpse, sitting on the ground in a daze while shedding tears. It seemed like she couldn't accept what had happened. Shenbing and Murong Yan were already by her side. The two of them tried to persuade her in low voices, but their hearts were also burning with anxiety. The two of them were also disciples of cultivation clans, and they even had masters. Faced with this kind of unforeseen event, they were afraid their clans and masters would be implicated. Mo Tiange first saluted Shenbing and Murong Yan when she arrived by their side. She then advised Wang Qianni in a low voice, "Senior Martial Sister Wang, now isn't the time to be sad. Martial Uncle Wang has passed away, so the rest of the matters will have to depend on you. You have to keep your spirits up." Wang Qianni's gaze wavered. Mo Tiange hastily said, "We still have to rely on Senior Martial Sister Wang to take care of your mother and the people of Wang clan, lest they get involved in this matter." Wang Qianni took a deep breath, wiped her tears and looked at Mo Tiange. "Thank you for the reminder, Junior Martial Brother Yi. I'll persevere." Mo Tiange nodded lightly, then no longer said anything to them. Although she was familiar with Wang Qianni, their friendship hadn't reached the point where they could advance or retreat together. Before the matter was clear, it was better for them not to have too many interactions. Mo Tiange raised her head, wanting to look for Lu Yidao and the others, but she saw Jiang Shanghang first. Jiang Shanghang's expression was unsightly and looked increasingly gloomy for some unknown reason. Chapter 60. Before long, they found Su Jingji. When Mo Tiange approached him, she discovered that his expression was also very unsightly. She pulled his sleeve to draw his attention back to her. Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Su Jingji trembled slightly. This. How could this be? How could Mo Tiange answer this question? She could only comfort him. Senior Marshal Brother Su, don't worry. I think they just want to annex the other two groups. As long as it's not necessary, they won't kill anyone. Su Jingji shook his head. How could it be that easy to annex other cultivation groups? The 3 cultivation groups have been established here for several thousand years. It's not like there hasn't been a situation where one of them was especially powerful, but they've always lived in harmony. Every cultivation group has a complicated relationship. It's easy to oppress them with force, but it's not easy to completely control them. I have a feeling that if Zixia sect makes a move, blood will flow like a river. Mo Tiange was speechless. She didn't really understand the matters of cultivation groups and clans, so what Su Jingji said sounded very reasonable. He turned around and saw that Qin Shi had come looking for him. Junior Marshal Brothers. Although his expression was calm, it was much graver than usual. Senior Marshal Brother Qin. Mo Tiange turned to look at him. Have you seen Senior Marshal Brother Lu? Qin Shi shook his head. I don't know where Senior Marshal Brother Lu is. I only saw you two. He paused for a moment then said, but I saw Senior Marshal Brother Jiang, and his complexion looked very bad. Su Jingji snorted coldly. Of course his expression wasn't good. It was their Jiang clan who betrayed Yunwu's sect. Both Mo Tiange and Qin Shi were stunned. Jiang clan. The core formation cultivator who acted as a spy just now was indeed called Brother Jiang. So that's Jiang clan's core formation grandmaster. Qin Shi nodded slightly. It seems Senior Marshal Brother Jiang also feels bad. What's there to be unhappy about? Su Jingji sneered. This time, their Jiang clan has gotten what they wanted. In order to seize the sect's power, they didn't hesitate to become someone else's grandson. Mo Tiange and Qin Shi glanced at each other but didn't answer. Everyone knew that Jiang Shanghang and Jiang clan weren't on good terms. Besides, the clan's aura refining disciples basically didn't know about this kind of matter. Most likely, when Jiang Shanghang found out about it, his mood would be far more complicated than others. Qin Shi pondered for a moment then said, aside from waiting, there's no other way. Junior Apprentice Brother Su, raise your spirits. If there are any changes, it'll be easier to deal with them. How could Su Jingji not know? He just felt restless when he thought about his family in Yunwu's sect. The 3 of them found a corner and slowly waited. After a night, a streak of light finally flashed across the horizon. This streak of light landed on the square. It was a core formation cultivator. After exchanging a few words with the guards, the man walked towards the Yunwu sect disciples and said, all disciples, follow me back to Yunwu sect. You're not allowed to disobey my order. Mo Tiange and the other 2 looked hesitant when they heard what he said. Su Jingji whispered, could it be? Both of them could guess what he wanted to say. Now that they were called back, it could only mean that the matter had been settled. It was unknown what they had done in order to seize power in the sect. Qin Shi remained calm and said, we'll know once we go back and take a look. Mo Tiange nodded. Yes. Senior Brother Su, let's go back first. Su Jingji nodded with a pale face. Several hundred Yunwu sect disciples boarded this core formation cultivator's flying magic weapon. When they came, they were restless because they were excited. Now that they were going back, they were still restless because they were frightened. Although Mo Tiange wasn't as worried as Su Jingji, she was also afraid they might hurt innocent people during the fight. If the fight of magical powers between core formation cultivators destroyed Mount Yunwu's market square, second uncle would be in danger. His heart was burning with anxiety, and the journey of a few hours was especially long. After an unknown amount of time, the gate of Mount Yunwu finally appeared below. When they landed on Yunwu Sect Square, the core formation cultivator shouted, "All disciples, return to your immortals' caves. Don't go out at will." Naturally, no one dared to question him. The Yunwu Sect disciples lowered their heads and left one after another. Even if they were worried about their family, they didn't dare to say anything. Mo Tiange glanced at the foot of the mountain. Everything seemed calm and there were no signs of fighting. Second uncle should be safe, right? When they returned to their residence, everyone didn't even have the mood to talk. They just sat in the small living room in a daze. Even Jiang Shanghang didn't return to his room. Like them, he was staring at the gate in a daze. They didn't know where Lu Yidao had gone. Even now, there was no trace of him. The longer Su Jingji waited, the more anxious he became. He stood up and started walking in circles in the living room. Jiang Shanghang finally slammed the teacup in his hand on the table with a loud bang and said in a rough voice, "Stop walking." This sentence gave Su Jingji a breakthrough in his depressed mood. He immediately stood still. His eyes seemed to be spitting fire. After a long time, he finally straightened his neck and said, "What did you say?" Jiang Shanghang said in a muffled voice, "You're making me dizzy." Su Jingji paused for a while, then suddenly took a step forward. He gnashed his teeth and said, "You still dare to talk? It's all your Jiang clan's fault. As elders of Yunwu sect, you actually colluded with outsiders. You still have the face to talk." Jiang Shanghang's complexion turned pale, but in the next second, he stood up with a flushed face. "What does it have to do with me? What kind of people do you think the others are? It's your Su clan. It's just that you don't have the ability. Otherwise, who knows who would have betrayed you?" "You." Su Jingji's expression changed greatly. He rushed forward, grabbed Jiang Shanghang's collar and was about to punch him. How could Jiang Shanghang be willing to show weakness? Without saying a word, the two of them started to fight. Mo Tiange's mind was in a mess, but seeing them like this, she had no choice but to stop them. However, she still had misgivings and didn't dare to have too much contact with them. Since she couldn't pull them away, she could only cast a pleading gaze towards Qin Shi, who was still sitting motionlessly. Qin Shi shook his head at her. Mo Tiange didn't understand. What does he mean? Don't care. Qin Shi sighed and pointed at the seat next to him. He waited until she hesitantly came over and sat down before he said, "The two of them are in a bad mood. It's good for them to vent their feelings by fighting. Don't worry. You see, they aren't using any spiritual aura, so they can't hurt anyone." "Really?" She turned around and saw that the two of them had finally gotten into a tussle. They were punching and kicking like mortals in the secular world, completely disorderly. After a long time, the two of them were tired and finally stopped. However, both of them were badly battered and gasping for breath. Mo Tiange sighed and helped Su Jingji up. "Senior Martial Brother Su, I won't help you treat your injuries. You should look at yourself in the mirror." Su Jingji sat on a chair and smiled bitterly. "Junior Martial Brother Yi, you're still telling jokes at this time. What can I do if I don't tell jokes?" Mo Tiange stared at the tranquil scene outside the room. "We can't do anything." Right at that moment, someone hurriedly walked into the courtyard. Su Jingji was pleasantly surprised. It's Senior Marshal Brother Liu. Everyone crowded around him. Liu Yidao was startled the moment he entered the room. Su Jingji couldn't help but ask, Senior Marshal Brother Liu, what happened? Where did you go? Liu Yidao looked at them and smiled bitterly. I was left behind in Zixia sect and just came back. He saw the bruises on Su Jingji's and Jiang Shanghang's faces. Junior Marshal brothers, what happened? Qin Shi said, Senior Marshal Brother Liu, you don't need to worry. They're just having an argument. I wonder if Senior Marshal Brother saw the situation outside when you came back. Liu Yidao looked at the two of them hesitantly and answered, Junior Marshal brothers, you don't need to worry. There's no big change in the sect. However, in the next few days, we'd better not go out. I heard they're going to carry out a purge of Yunwu sect's forces. We'd better not get involved. Is that so? Su Jingji smiled bitterly. I wonder how my family is. If there's nothing going on, they should have sent us a message. Liu Yidao comforted him. Junior Marshal Brother Su, don't worry. Cultivation clans are the foundation of cultivation groups. As long as your family doesn't resist, nothing will happen. Although he said that, Su Jingji still couldn't help but worry. Although Jiang Shanghang wasn't worried about his family, his mood became even worse when he heard this news. Without saying a word, he went back to his room and slammed the door with a loud bang. Mo Tiange stared outside the room with a heavy heart. Sure enough, they're going to carry out a purge. It seemed that under this tranquility, Yunwu's sect was really going to be bathed in blood. Chapter 61. Several days later, Yunwu's sect officially changed its name to Zixia sect's Mount Yunwu branch. As soon as she regained her freedom, Mo Tiange went down the mountain to see if second uncle was doing well and then told him about this matter. In the past few days, Yi Jiang had already understood everything. He only said to her, just concentrate on cultivating. You don't need to care about this kind of thing. As long as you can build your foundation, it doesn't matter which cultivation group you're in. In all fairness, Mo Tiange didn't have any feelings for cultivation groups. In the past 10 years, it was second uncle who took her to wander around, devoted himself to raising her. Yunwu's sect didn't do anything for her, and she didn't have too many feelings for Yunwu's sect either. In the entire celestial pole, or in the entire cultivation world, most people were this practical. Now that she was in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, she could already abstain from eating, so she simply stayed in her room to stabilize her cultivation level and study formations. She hadn't had time to study the Qimen Duanjia she obtained in Miwu Valley 2 years ago. Now was the perfect time to carefully study it. During the time she stayed in her room, the influence of the annexation of the sect became greater and greater. Zixia sect sent several core formation cultivators to take over. Now, there was no sect head of Yunwu sect, only the master of Mount Yunwu, and the master of this branch was precisely the core formation cultivator from Jiang clan. Of course, this didn't have much to do with Jiang Shanghang. He wasn't close to his sect and had a grudge against Jiang Qingxian. It was already good enough that he wasn't bullied, so how could he enjoy any special treatment? Apart from Jiang clan, none of the other core formation cultivators escaped this calamity. Even their clans were implicated. Moreover, most of the sect's disciples came from cultivation clans. Because of threats and promises, disciples died every day because of this, causing everyone to live in fear every day. Normally, the individual cultivators who entered the sect through the Immortals' Assembly shouldn't be affected too much, but several disciples were implicated and died. Fortunately, Su Jingji wasn't among them. Later, Mo Tiange heard that Wang Qianyi married a junior of a core formation cultivator from Zixia sect and went to Zixia sect. Because of this, Wang clan was spared and was no longer investigated. Mo Tiange could only sigh about this. As a woman, Her body was her last asset. Senior Marshal Sister Wang was a proud woman. Although her father was a foundation-building cultivator, she was never proud and always treated others kindly. But in the end, she couldn't protect herself. Mo Tiange recalled when she ran into Shenbing and Mo Tiange in Miwu Valley. Mo Tiange mentioned that she was verbally harassed by Shenbing. Although Shenbing was angry, she tolerated it, but Mo Tiange cursed at her. Mo Tiange also recalled that today, she was forced to marry the hedonistic son of a rich family she despised the most. She really had no control over her own fate. After a while, she heard that Shenbing was forced to become sect head Li's son's concubine. Senior sister Shenbing had always been famous for her beauty in the three sections. Many of the disciples of the three sects had fallen under her skirt. She was not surprised at all that she had fallen into such a situation. Beauty was wealth, but it was also a curse. If she hadn't disguised herself as a man and stopped showing her womanly side, she probably wouldn't have had a good ending today. Later. Yan's Mo Li's sect, Sex Yan, sect, Yan Yan as, Mo Xia sex Li's city as well as she could. Mo, as she said, Mu's Mu. Qing, Mu as Qing, Mu. Apart from replying with a blessing summoning amulet, there was nothing else she could do. Several months later, the storm of annexing the two sects gradually subsided. When Mo Tiange came out of her room and saw the three of them in the small living room, she couldn't help but feel a bit surprised. What's going on? Lu Yidao beckoned her over. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, come over and let's have a chat. Filled with questions, he walked over and found a chair to sit on. Mo Tiange really didn't believe Qin Shi was fine. Lu Yidao and Su Jingji were extroverted, so it was normal for them to gather and chat when they had nothing to do. However, Qin Shi never left his room unless he had something to do. The reason he stayed outside was either because he had something to do or because he was interested in a topic. Lu Yidao excitedly asked, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you still don't know about the news that just came out, right? What news? Lu Yidao mysteriously paused for a moment before continuing, news about foundation building pills. Ah. Mo Tiange almost forgot about this matter. After the sect's extermination, she also forgot about the minor competition that was supposed to be held several months ago. What's wrong? Are they going to hold the minor competition again? Lu Yidao shook his head, feeling extremely excited. I heard that in order to appease the sect's disciples, they're going to increase the distribution of foundation building pills and change the method of distribution. Method? What method? Are we not going to hold the minor competition anymore? Lu Yidao nodded. Yes, the minor competition this time is cancelled. Mo Tiange didn't understand. Then what method are they going to use? Su Jingji, who had been silent the whole time, coldly snorted and said, Isn't it because too many people died this time? If we hold the minor competition, it'll be too cold and cheerless, so they're changing the method. Su Jingji's mood had always been bad. Although their Su clan wasn't implicated, they weren't having a good time either. Su Jingji originally had an uncle in the foundation building realm, but because he was close to sect head Fang, he was demoted back to the clan. Fortunately, he expressed his stance quickly, so he didn't implicate other people. Coupled with Shenbing's and Wang Qianyi's experiences, Su Jingji, who was also a descendant of a cultivation clan, was filled with hatred. Upon seeing his reaction, Qin Shi coughed and said, Junior Marshal Brother Su, it's better for you to calm down a bit. No matter what happened in the past, Zixia sect is hanging over our heads now. Su Jingji's expression stiffened, but in the end, he still agreed. How could he not know this? However, his life had been smooth ever since he was a child. Aside from the Immortals' Assembly, he had never encountered such a depressing matter, so he didn't hide his emotions. Lu Yidao felt very embarrassed after being interrupted. Su Jingji's mood wasn't right, yet he was so excited. He immediately restrained his emotions and said, I heard the demonic beasts in the depths of Kunwa mountain range are getting restless again, and the small demonic beasts in the vicinity are also frequently injuring people. Therefore, the sect has decided to reward us according to the number of demonic beasts we catch in Mount Yunwu within a day. The first few dozen disciples will be qualified to receive foundation building pills. Is that so? Mo Tiange frowned. In the depths of the south of Kunwu was a dense forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. Reportedly, there were many high-level demonic beasts there, but in the vicinity of the sect, there were generally only first and second-rank demonic beasts. The first rank was equivalent to the aura refining realm, while the second rank was equivalent to the early stage of the foundation building realm. As long as aura refining disciples were careful, they could deal with first-rank demonic beasts. As for second-rank demonic beasts, although it was a bit difficult, demonic beasts didn't know how to use talismans and didn't know many spells, so they could still be killed if many people ganged up on them. Even if they couldn't kill them, they could still run away. However, although this method sounded good, it wasn't like the minor competition where even if they were strong enough, one of them would meet a tragic end if they met a similar opponent. But after careful consideration, it was actually a preferential treatment for cultivation clans because they had a lot of manpower. When the time came, they could concentrate on one person and obtain a foundation building pill. As for the other disciples, who would be willing to sacrifice themselves for others? After all, if there were spoils of war, there would be rewards. Can we go together? Lu Yidao shook his head. This time, we won't be competing in Miwu Valley. Disciples will be competing with each other. Of course, if we run into each other inside, we'll presumably be allowed to move together. However, the chances of that happening are really low. The mountain forest is too big. Mo Tiange was calculating in her heart. This method had both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that she didn't need to be afraid of being seen by others, so she could just use whatever method she had. The disadvantage was that she had to be extra careful. After all, if she wasn't careful when fighting demonic beasts, she might end up dying in their mouths. Chapter 62. The vast forest stretched as far as the eye could see. It was verdant and lush, stretching for thousands of miles. Mo Tiange stood on top of a high cliff, silently watching. This was the southern end of Kunwa mountain range, a part of the forest. Countless demonic beasts lived here. Some were tamed by cultivators and became spiritual beasts, but most of them lived freely in this forest, cultivating and taking human forms. It was said that in the innermost part of the forest, near the sea, lived many demonic beasts that had already taken human forms. They generally didn't go out of the forest, but every once in a while, they couldn't help but want to order low-level demonic beasts to attack and occupy the areas where human cultivators lived. Of course, they couldn't occupy those areas under normal circumstances. However, they could obtain a lot of medicinal pills to help their cultivation every time they came here, so they were very happy. Every time this happened, it was a gamble. Sometimes the human cultivators suffered heavy losses, but sometimes they obtained a lot of good demonic beast corpses to be used as tool refining materials. Mo Tiange had never encountered this kind of situation. She was only a low-level cultivator and had only been in Kunwu for 10 years. The last time she fought against demonic beasts was at least 50 or 60 years ago. Standing on this high cliff with her were a core formation cultivator, more than 10 foundation building cultivators, and several hundred aura refining cultivators. The consequences of Zixia sect annexing Yunwu sect could already be seen. In the last minor competition, Yunwu sect had more than 400 disciples in the 7th layer or above, but now, there were probably less than 300, maybe even fewer. Among these cultivators, Mo Tiange didn't see many familiar figures. Senior Marshal Brother Zhou didn't come because, with his cultivation level in the 11th layer of the aura refining realm, he would definitely get a share of the foundation building pills. Since the sect had just suffered a disaster, he didn't want to attract attention, so he simply didn't participate. Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing also didn't come. The two of them went to Zixia sect's main branch, and it was said that they had already decided to get a share of the foundation building pills. Because of this, Mo Tiange felt a little better. At least the two of them weren't making unnecessary sacrifices. Murong Yan, on the other hand, came. She looked pale and skinny, standing alone in the crowd. Her face was expressionless, and her original beauty was completely gone. Seeing her appearance, Mo Tiange sighed in her heart. This was also good. At least, she wouldn't follow in Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing's footsteps. Not long after, another group of people flew over from the horizon and landed on this flat cliff. They were Jin Dao School's disciples. Just like Yunwu's sect, although they didn't change the color of their clothes, they added the symbol of Zixia sect. At a rough glance, there were only about 100 Jin Dao School disciples. Apparently, they had also gone through a purge. Everyone had a distracted expression on their faces. Fighting over foundation building pills was something like that, yet none of them looked excited. Obviously, what they saw was even more miserable than what Yunwu's sect's disciples experienced. The core formation cultivator leading them was a Daoist priest dressed in secular clothes. Because of this, Mo Tiange stared at him a few more times. Although the righteous cultivators in the immortal cultivation world all practiced Dao techniques, many of them dressed as Daoists, which was different from the secular world. Most of the Daoists in the secular world wore cyan or dark blue buttoned robes, which were thick and heavy without any sense of hierarchy. Daoist robes in the cultivation world, on the other hand, were mostly beautified. Dark blue robes, buttoned robes, and plain robes were layered with innate trigrams and taiji cloud patterns. Their colors were also distinguished, making them look elegant yet dignified. Compared to the Daoists in the secular world, Daoists appeared even more elegant and graceful. Therefore, they rarely wore secular Daoist robes because they couldn't show the temperament of cultivators. The Daoist in front of her was obviously a core formation cultivator, but he didn't care about what he wore at all. It was obvious that he had a firm Dao heart. Once this person arrived, the current branch master of Yunwu Mountain greeted him enthusiastically, Senior Marshal Brother Lin, long time no see. This Daoist didn't give him any face. He only let out a soft, humph, then closed his eyes to rest. Branch Master Jiang was snubbed, so he looked a little embarrassed. Mo Tiange saw that some of the Yunwu sect disciples, such as Su Jingji, were secretly pleased. Jiang Shangheng, on the other hand, looked annoyed. It seemed he couldn't bear to see his elder's behavior. He stared at a cultivator next to Branch Master Jiang, hatred flashing across his face. Mo Tiange realized that person was Jiang Qingxian, a disciple of Jiang clan who once bullied her. This Jiang Qingxian seemed to be Branch Master Jiang's direct descendant. He always followed Branch Master Jiang, and there was a complacent expression on his face. Although Mo Tiange wasn't close to Jiang Shangheng, upon seeing this scene, she still somewhat despised Jiang Qingxian. He was a hedonistic son of a rich family who relied on his blood relationship with his elder to commit outrages. He didn't concentrate on cultivating and didn't have any real skills. It was no wonder Jiang Shangheng didn't like him. After a while, another group of people flew over from the horizon. The number of people was much more than the number of their two groups. They were Zixia sect's disciples. The cultivator who led Zixia sect's group was rather good-natured. He was also indifferent to Branch Master Jiang, but he was very polite to that Daoist. After the three of them talked for a while, they each used their magic weapons. In an instant, a transporting formation appeared out of thin air. It seemed to be the same technique as the one in Miwu Valley. Presumably, it had been used to test the disciples before. All disciples, go in one by one. No pushing. After experiencing the calamity that befell their sect, the disciples of Yunwu's sect and Jindao school were naturally quiet. On the other hand, Zixia sect's disciples were beaming with joy and rushed to go in first. The disciples of the other two groups also didn't care and just waited. Mo Tiange looked left and right. Among her fellow martial brothers, Lu Yidao was itching to try, Su Jingji had a calm expression, Qin Shi still had a calm expression, and Jiang Shanghang had a deep frown on his face. She touched her face and felt that it was a bit stiff, so she slowed down her breathing and adjusted her mentality. She was determined to obtain the foundation building pill. In the future, if she couldn't stand Zixia sect's way of doing things, she could find an excuse to leave the mountain and never come back. Zixia sect didn't have time to care about a low-level disciple. Before that, it would be best if she could obtain the foundation building pill in the sect and build her foundation. Otherwise, with only her aura refining cultivation level and second uncle's lifespan approaching its end, she wouldn't dare to casually leave. As her imagination ran wild, she suddenly noticed that Su Jingji, who was the closest to her, seemed to be trembling. Mo Tiange called out in a low voice, "Senior Martial Brother Su." Su Jingji turned his head. His face was so pale that he was sweating profusely. His voice was also trembling slightly. Mo Tiange sighed. "We haven't gone in yet. Don't collapse." Upon hearing what she said, Su Jingji hastily wiped his sweat and pretended that nothing had happened. "Junior Martial Brother Yi doesn't need to worry. Even if I worry, I won't be able to," Mo Tiange said. "You have to be alert. This forest is very dangerous, and we can't travel together." Su Jingji nodded. After a long time, he seemed to still be in a bad mood. He whispered to her, "Junior Martial Brother Yi, I'm really worried. Our three groups obviously have a grudge against each other. If we go into the forest like this, won't there be some kind of conflict?" Mo Tiange was puzzled. "Why?" Su Jingji was silent for a long time. All of a sudden, he said through clenched teeth, "If I run into that Jiang Qingxian, if I can clean him up, I'll..." A fierce look flashed across his face. She knew what he meant. Mo Tiange was startled. She turned her head around and saw that no one was paying attention to them. She then said in a low voice, "Senior Martial Brother Su, you mustn't talk nonsense. You're too nervous." Su Jingji closed his eyes and nodded. He then wiped the sweat on his face and said, "Junior Martial Brother Yi is right." Right after he said that, he closed his eyes to rest, adjusting his breath and calming his mind. Mo Tiange pondered for a moment, then took out something from inside her robe and handed it to him. "Senior Martial Brother Su, this is a heart-calming talisman. If you can't control yourself, just stick it on your body." Su Jingji opened his eyes. Without saying anything, he accepted the talisman and said, "Thank you, Junior Martial Brother Yi." Mo Tiange smiled. She no longer said anything and just stared at the transporting formation. In just a short while, almost all the Zixia sect disciples had left. She composed herself, then walked towards the transporting formation. Chapter 63. The transporting formation shone brightly. Without any hesitation, Mo Tiange slapped a defensive talisman on her body. This time, it was different from Miwu Valley. No matter what, Miwu Valley had been dealt with by the seniors of the three sections. Although there were still demonic beasts, there were only a few left. Moreover, there were some restrictions set up in the valley. As long as the disciples had the medallions, they wouldn't die. But in this forest, it was hard to say. If they really teleported to the front of the demonic beasts and got bitten, it would be fatal. Moreover, there was a turbulent undercurrent between the disciples of the three sections. In addition, there were some people who would forget what was right for the sake of profit. They might really lose their lives. Because she'd long anticipated that this trip would definitely be dangerous, she deliberately used some things to exchange with Qin Shi for some talismans. A while ago, Qin Shi had been practicing drawing talismans. Although he lost a lot of his talismans, he also made quite a few finished ones. Since he didn't like them, he said he had a lot left, so the other three people exchanged a lot of talismans with him. Mo Tiange didn't have many spirit stones left, so she used some materials to exchange with him. He didn't really care because he dabbled in both pill concocting and tool refining, so he accepted everything she offered. Mo Tiange was somewhat worried about preparing for the trial this time. She wasn't a wealthy cultivator, and all the spirit stones she needed for cultivation were obtained through rewards or transactions. Unfortunately, she didn't have a good aptitude, so the amount of spirit stones she needed to cultivate was quite a lot. It turned out that second uncle had sold his own belongings to prepare talismans and pills for her during the minor competition of the three sects. She really didn't have any other belongings. There were only about 100 or so spirit stones left, which were reserved for laying formations. There were also some spiritual plants, spiritual objects, and other materials, but most of them had already been exchanged for spirit stones, so the remaining ones couldn't be sold for much money. There were also too few talismans, so they couldn't be exchanged for spirit stones. In addition, there were a bunch of unknown things. Some of them were recognized by Qin Shi, so he exchanged them for talismans. As for the rest, he didn't know what they were. She remembered that she had obtained a bead from the man of the Yin clan. It was about the size of a child's fist. She could feel the surging spiritual qi in it, but no one could recognize what it was. In this way, only the spiritual weapons were still valuable. Most of them were obtained from the man from the Yin clan 3 years ago, so she didn't dare to sell them. However, this wasn't something she needed to worry about right now. At the very least, she had made sufficient preparations for this test. Once she was transported into the forest, Mo Tiange immediately looked around. Fortunately, he didn't encounter any demonic beasts. She heaved a sigh of relief and took a step forward. The next moment, she missed her footing and fell straight down. She hurriedly used the light body technique, found a foothold, and leaped up. This was a steep slope. Because there were too many vines, it looked like solid ground in front, but it was actually just vines attached to it. She slapped her forehead. It was really a false alarm. She had observed the surroundings but had forgotten to look under her feet. It seemed that she would have to pay more attention in the future. He was surrounded by dense trees and vines that crawled everywhere. Beneath his feet was a thick layer of dried leaves. It was very difficult to find a path. From inside her robe, Mo Tiange took out a jade slip engraved with a map of this place. However, this map was too rough, and there was no reference nearby, so she simply couldn't find it. She could only give up. She carefully restrained her breath, took out her greenwood sword, and walked through the forest. There was an advantage to being here, and that was that she cultivated a wood-attributed cultivation technique. In this forest, the wood qi was dense, and the power of her cultivation technique would be even greater. Suddenly, she felt a spiritual aura movement behind her. Mo Tiange, who had been observing her surroundings attentively, immediately moved. She blocked with her greenwood sword and turned around to see her opponent. It was actually a brightly colored flat-headed demonic snake. In an instant, her hair stood on end. Even though she considered herself bold, she really wanted to vomit when facing such a snake. But now wasn't the time to vomit. This demonic snake's breath wasn't weak. If she didn't concentrate and died under its mouth, it would be even more disgusting. This snake was more than 10 feet long, as thick as the mouth of a bull, with a flat head and a thin tongue. Its cold and gloomy eyes were directly staring at her. Judging from the breath it emitted, it was a first-rank demonic beast. In an instant, the snake jumped up and spat black venom towards her. At this time, the defensive talisman on her body took effect. The venom fell off before it could touch her body. After this attack, the defensive barrier on her body shook and was about to break. Mo Tiange didn't dare to be careless, so she took out another defensive talisman and slapped it on her body. Then she took out her greenwood sword and attacked the snake's weak point. This demonic snake was very agile. It moved as fast as lightning. As it stretched and shrank, it tangled with greenwood sword. Mo Tiange carefully controlled greenwood sword while taking out a handful of seeds from her Qianquan bag. Taking advantage of the fact that the snake was tangled with greenwood sword, she threw them out. The seeds fell on the snake's body. One by one, they grew into fire thorns, firmly entangling the demonic snake. She calmed down a little, but in the next second, she was so surprised that she almost shouted. The demonic snake stretched and shrank its body. The fire thorns entangling its body couldn't pierce its skin at all. Instead, it swung its tail and sent the thorns flying. Mo Tiange's expression turned grave. The scales on this snake's skin were unexpectedly so hard that the thorns of the fire thorns couldn't pierce through. The demonic snake dodged greenwood sword and suddenly turned its head towards her. The tip of its tongue spat out wasn't venom, but fog. Mo Tiange felt dizzy. She was shocked. This must be poisonous fog. She didn't dare to be careless. While holding her breath, she took out a medicinal pill from her Qianquan bag and threw it into her mouth. As the medicinal power of the refreshing pill spread, her mind immediately became clear. She didn't dare to continue entangling with the snake, so she took out a talisman and threw it at the snake's body. A pillar of water soared into the sky and poured on the snake's body. Soon after, it froze into ice, and the demonic snake's body immediately slowed down. Greenwood sword stabbed down. With a pu sound, the sword finally pierced through its scales and firmly nailed it 7 inches from its head. The demonic snake twisted a few times, but it couldn't break free from the ice or the greenwood sword. In the end, it stopped breathing and stopped moving. Mo Tiange heaved a sigh of relief. She retrieved her greenwood sword and carefully wiped it clean. She regretfully looked at the ice on the demonic snake's body. This freezing talisman wasn't cheap. This forest was really dangerous everywhere. It was only a snake, but it actually put her in such a dangerous situation and even made her use an freezing talisman. Facing the snake's corpse on the ground, Mo Tiange was in a dilemma. During this trial, the elders of the school clearly told her to bring back the demonic beast's corpse. However, this snake looked really disgusting, so she couldn't do anything about it. After hesitating for a while, she took out a leather pouch from her Qianquan bag. With a flick of her greenwood sword, she picked up the snake's corpse, fastened the mouth of the pouch, and threw it into her Qianquan bag. Once she finished doing all this, she once again restrained her breath, carefully identified her direction and went out of this forest. In the dense forest, a clear brook flowed through an open space in the forest, meandering downwards. Under the nourishment of this brook, the grassland on both sides was lush and the wildflowers were brilliant. It was indeed a beautiful scene in the wilderness. However, in this beautiful scene, there were 2 people who ruined it. One of them was wearing purple robes, and the other was wearing yellow robes. Their cuffs were embroidered with the same symbol. The 2 of them fiercely glared at each other. The purple-robed youth snorted and said angrily, "Jindao School's disciple, you actually dared to mount a sneak attack on me." The yellow-robed middle-aged cultivator's expression didn't change. He said faintly, "Yellow-haired brat, so what if I mount a sneak attack on you?" Angered by his unmoved attitude, the youth's face twisted. "I'm a disciple of Zixia sect's main branch. Aren't you afraid of being punished by your school? The middle-aged cultivator smiled faintly. If I did everything cleanly, who would be able to trace it back to me? You. The youth was seething with anger. Presumably, he didn't have enough experience and hadn't experienced any setbacks in his cultivation, so he was easily provoked. He immediately manipulated the spirit tool in his hand and rushed towards the middle-aged cultivator. The middle-aged cultivator cautiously took a step back. While manipulating the spirit tool, he secretly took out a talisman. Both of them were in the 10th layer. For a moment, they were evenly matched as they fought back and forth. Right at this moment, another person came out of the forest. This time, he was wearing black robes. When he saw the two people fighting, his expression changed. After a long time, he finally took out an object from his chinkuan bag and threw it towards one of them. Following the sound of the brook, several spiritual aura fluctuations attracted her attention. She carefully hid her tracks and walked towards the place where the fight was taking place. On the meadow beside the brook, two disciples from Zixia sect and Jindao school were fighting. In the corner of the forest, a Yunwu sect disciple with a ferocious expression threw the spirit tool in his hand. Ah! With a blood-curdling scream, that Zixia sect disciple lay in a pool of blood, no longer breathing. The disciples of Jindao school and Yunwu sect both heaved sighs of relief. The two of them didn't fight or talk. They just divided the Zixia sect disciple's belongings, burned his corpse with a fire, and then went their separate ways. Mo Tiange hid herself in the forest, drenched in cold sweat. What Su Jingji was worried about finally happened. The disciples of Jindao school and Yunwu sect, who harbored hatred in their hearts, killed the lone Zixia sect disciple to vent their hatred. She could imagine what would happen next. Those who killed Zixia sect disciples couldn't help but attack again. If they attacked too many times, Zixia sect disciples would discover that their fellow disciples were killed. In their anger, they would retaliate against the two groups. The disciples of the three groups would then fight each other, resulting in countless casualties. This trial was indeed full of dangers. Not only did she have to guard against the demonic beasts in the forest, but she also had to worry about other cultivators. After spending a long time to calm down, Mo Tiange once again set foot on the road. Even if she was worried, it was useless. She could only carefully avoid them because the formation at the exit would only open after one day, and she was determined to obtain the foundation building pill. Chapter 64. Once she found the stream, Mo Tiange could finally distinguish her position on the map. Then, in order to deliberately avoid others, she carefully studied a route. Fortunately, the information stated roughly what was in each place, and each disciple had a copy of the map. By finding a place that no one liked, she could naturally avoid most people. If someone was unlucky enough to be teleported to that place, he or she would probably leave. The place she found was dangerous in the eyes of ordinary people. There were cliffs, abysses, and a poisonous spring that emitted poisonous fog all year round. The map indicated that this place wasn't good. It wasn't easy to walk, and there weren't any demonic beasts that were easy to kill. However, there were some demonic monkeys that lived in groups, which were quite troublesome. Mo Tiange thought about it. It wasn't easy to walk, so she just had to be careful. After all, she wasn't an ordinary person, so she wouldn't encounter any accidents. As for those demonic monkeys that lived in groups, they were suitable for her. She was good at formations, and first-rank demonic beasts couldn't recognize them. She just needed to find a suitable place to lay a disorienting formation and lure the monkeys inside. Then, she wouldn't be afraid no matter how many monkeys there were. After making up her mind, she walked smoothly. Although her breath-concealing technique wasn't brilliant, the divine sense of an aura-refining cultivator wasn't strong, so very few people could detect her. Soon, she arrived at the place indicated on the map. Mo Tiange took a look and unconsciously frowned. This place was indeed as the information said. It was a disgusting place. Probably because of the poisonous spring, there was poisonous fog as soon as she approached. The shrubs were so dense that there wasn't even a path, and most of them were poisonous. It was obviously daytime, but this place was gray and overcast. She couldn't see the sky at all. Without a better choice, Mo Tiange could only brace herself and go. After sweeping this area with her divine sense, she had a general understanding of the terrain and also found the position of the demonic monkeys. There were many faint spiritual aura fluctuations on the edge of the poisonous spring. The divine sense of an aura refining cultivator wasn't strong, so it was difficult to sense the spiritual aura fluctuations of a single low-ranked demonic beast. However, when they gathered together, it was very easy to distinguish them. She swallowed a refreshing pill to prevent the poisonous fog from affecting her. Then, she laid a simple disorienting formation and a spirit-trapping formation in a place that wasn't too far from her. As its name suggested, the spirit-trapping formation's main function was to make people lose their way. Once they entered the formation, they would keep walking in circles and couldn't get out. The spirit-trapping formation's purpose was to deal with people or beasts with spiritual aura. Once they entered the formation, their spiritual aura would run slower. Generally, this formation would be placed in cultivators' caves to prevent others from breaking in. These two formations were not enough. After thinking for a while, she set up another 5 elements life and death formation. This formation was more troublesome than the previous two, but she had been studying the formation book some time ago and had modified this formation. It could be used for both offense and defense, so it was safer to use it. After Moge's spiritual aura state, she adjusted it, she to defend. And attack. To be. She. And to Mo, she to. To, she, to. She to, she. Mo, and to her. She to, into to her to the spirit. With. Mo spirit to Mo demon. First-ranked demonic beasts weren't much smarter than ordinary beasts. They didn't know how to think and acted according to their instincts. Soon, their figures appeared in the poisonous fog. Sensing the sudden provocative aura, these demonic monkeys pounced towards Mo Tiange's location without the slightest hesitation. However, before they could even get close to her, they began to run in circles. The group of monkeys formed a circle and chased each other, running in circles from head to tail. It looked interesting, but Mo Tiange didn't dare to be careless. She waved the formation flag in her hand. The formation was instantly filled with quicksand and fire. The group of monkeys squeaked. They ran left and right, but they couldn't escape no matter how hard they tried. They were burned by the fire, so they ran and trampled on each other. Mo Tiange waved the formation flag again. Many stones fell from the formation. The group of monkeys had nowhere to hide and died under the stones. Mo Tiange breathed a sigh of relief when all the demonic monkeys were killed. Aura refining cultivators wouldn't be able to deal with so many first-ranked demonic beasts if they hadn't set traps in advance. Although they were successfully killed, she still spent a lot of spiritual aura. The ability of aura refining cultivators was too low. They couldn't use multiple spirit tools at the same time, nor could they maintain a fight of magical power for a long time. Even magic weapons without cultivation level restrictions couldn't display much of their power. The more she cultivated, the more eager she was to build her foundation. After recovering her spiritual aura, Mo Tiange stood up and cleaned up the mess. There were about 20 to 30 monkeys in the group just now. Presumably, there would be a chaotic fight in this mountain forest, so the number of demonic beasts they killed wouldn't be many. These demonic beasts were enough to exchange for a foundation building pill. Therefore, after stuffing the corpses of the demonic monkeys into her chinkuan bag, she sat in the formation and meditated. She didn't plan to kill any more demonic beasts. Her goal was only to obtain a foundation-building pill. She didn't want to lose her life, nor did she want to be in the limelight. While she was meditating leisurely, a monstrous wave was set off in this mountain forest. The first Xixia sect disciple who was killed wasn't discovered, but it wasn't just one or two people who had this idea. Soon, other people also made their moves. Xixia sect disciples were numerous and powerful. They also felt that these two groups were exterminated, so how could they be willing to give up? By the afternoon, the fight had already been brought to the surface. Although the total number of Yunwu sect and Jindao school's disciples wasn't as many as Xixia sect's disciples, they harbored hatred in their hearts. Moreover, they usually launched sneak attacks and succeeded quite a few times. However, when Xixia sect disciples finally reacted, both sides began to have victories and defeats. As more and more people were killed, they basically didn't care about anything else and started fighting as soon as they saw each other. Mo Tiange didn't know any of this. Fortunately, she came to this place. Otherwise, she would have probably also been involved in the fight. The sky gradually darkened, but Mo Tiange didn't do anything. She just sat in the middle of the formation. She couldn't light the lamp or it would attract other people. Even if she didn't attract other people, it wouldn't be good to fight at night if some demonic beast came. In any case, she could still see a little. She only needed to endure this night because the exit formation would be open tomorrow. Suddenly, she wrinkled her brows and raised her head. Spiritual aura fluctuations were coming from outside. Someone seemed to be coming here. After pondering for a moment, she slightly tidied up the formation she laid, leaving behind the 5 elements life and death formation. She then hid herself and carefully paid attention to that person. That person stumbled as he ran. His steps were weak and he fell from time to time, but he still managed to run all the way to this place. But all of a sudden, he seemed to bump into something. With a bang, there was no sound. Even after a long time, she still couldn't hear any sound. Mo Tiange pondered for a moment, then came out of her hiding place and cautiously felt her way over. She had always been cautious. Now that she had a defensive spell on her body and greenwood sword in her hand, she could deal with this person even if he suddenly launched an attack. Therefore, she decided to go and take a look. Not far from her, there was a person lying motionless on the ground. The sky was too dark, so she couldn't see him clearly. She could only vaguely see that he was wearing black clothes. Mo Tiange felt a bit relieved. She went over to take a look. Sure enough, it was a young Yunwu sect disciple. Senior Martial Brother, Senior Martial Brother. She gently pushed the person. After a long time, the person finally reacted. He raised his head with difficulty and said in a low voice, "Junior Martial Sister, help me." Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. Junior Martial Sister. Before she could think of anything, the person's head tilted to one side and he fainted again. After thinking for a moment, she still helped the person into the formation she laid. She didn't know this person. Yunwu sect had so many aura-refining disciples, but she only knew a few of them. Even the people in the other rooms in the courtyard only looked familiar to her, so she didn't remember this person at all. However, since they were both Yunwu sect disciples and there wasn't any trouble, she could lend him a hand. She then inserted her spiritual aura into the person's body to examine his injuries. After circulating her spiritual aura through the person's meridians, Mo Tiange felt a bit relieved. The injuries on his body were very serious, but his meridians weren't damaged, so it was actually easy. After thinking for a moment, she took out medicinal pills from inside her robe and fed him a refreshing pill to prevent the poisonous fog from entering his body. She then fed him an aura-nourishing pill. A refreshing pill was only an ordinary antidote pill, it wasn't a precious medicine. As for healing medicinal pills, she did have small reversion pills on her, but they were expensive. Even foundation-building cultivators could use them. Giving them to an aura-refining cultivator she didn't know would be a bit wasteful. Besides, she didn't know this person at all, so giving him something precious was a bit too kind. Kindness had to be done appropriately to make people feel grateful and not greedy. This was the principle second uncle taught her. Not long after, the man groaned and seemed to have woken up. Mo Tiange said, "Senior Marshal Brother, are you feeling better?" The person opened his eyes, struggled to sit up and forced a smile. "Junior Marshal Brother. Thank you. If I didn't run into you, I would have lost my life today." Mo Tiange said faintly, "Senior Marshal Brother, you don't have to be so polite. It was nothing." The person nodded and took out a jade bottle from inside his robe. After swallowing several medicinal pills, he handed the jade bottle to Mo Tiange. "I don't dare to let Junior Marshal Brother suffer any losses." Mo Tiange didn't stand on ceremony and took the bottle. This was also a rule in the cultivation world. First, no one was willing to help others and lose their belongings. Second, people who received favors from others didn't want to owe them favors. Upon seeing her taking the bottle, the person asked, "Junior Marshal Brother, where is this place? Is it safe?" Mo Tiange said, "This is the poisonous spring in the northwest." The person must have known about this place, so he immediately heaved a sigh of relief. "That's good. Presumably, no one will come here." After a pause, he greeted her again. "I'm Murongzi. May I ask how I should address Junior Marshal Brother?" Since he said "I am" instead of "I'm," he was obviously a well-known figure among aura-refining disciples. Mo Tiange had indeed heard of this name before. Murongzi was the disciple who persisted until the end with Senior Marshal Brother Zhou and the others in Miwu Valley's trial 2 years ago. At the same time, he was also Murong Yan's clan brother. Together with her, he became a disciple of the foundation-building cultivator Lin Qingwan. He was the Senior Marshal Brother Murong Yan mentioned who guarded the medicinal garden and provided seeds. This Senior Marshal Brother was indeed quite famous among the aura-refining disciples. Because she and Murong Yan could be considered friends, Mo Tiange was a bit polite. "So it's Senior Marshal Brother Murong. My name is Yi Xiaotian. I'm an old acquaintance of Senior Marshal Sister Murong." Murongzi let out a soft, "ah," then said, "So it's you. I heard Xiaoyan mention you before." He looked her up and down then revealed a smile. "No wonder I thought you were a Junior Marshal Sister in a daze just now." Mo Tiange originally had doubts, so she naturally asked, "Why is that?" Murongzi pursed his lips and said with a smile, "Because Xiaoyan said it's a pity you're a man. Your figure and appearance are more suitable to be a woman." Mo Tiange was instantly speechless. Aside from Su Jingji, Murong Yan also liked to tease her. She said she was thin and small and had a girlish appearance, so it would be good if she was a woman and so on. When she thought of Murong Yan, she couldn't help but sigh. The Murong Yan who loved to laugh and play around had already disappeared. Murongzi noticed something was wrong with her expression and thought she didn't like people saying she had a girlish appearance, so he changed the topic. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, did you meet anyone from Zixia sect here?" Mo Tiange shook her head. "No." Judging from Murongzi's expression, something seemed to have happened, so she asked, "Did Senior Marshal Brother Murong encounter something?" This question made Murongzi sigh. He then said, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you've always been here, so you probably don't know the disciples of the 3 groups have already started fighting." In fact, Mo Tiange had long foreseen this, but she didn't say it out loud and just pretended she didn't know. "Really? What's going on?" I don't know how it started. At first, it was just a private fight, but later on, it turned into a chaotic fight. We joined forces with Jindao School and were already fighting against Zixia sect. Originally, I didn't want to get involved, but as long as I ran into people from Zixia sect, they would take the initiative to attack me. I had no choice but to protect myself. Just now, I was killing a demonic wolf, but I was sneak attacked by someone. It wasn't easy for me to escape. Speaking up to this point, he had a worried expression on his face. It's so chaotic now. I don't know how Xiaoyan is doing. She used to always be lazy, so fights of magical power are really. Upon hearing what he said, Mo Tiange also felt a bit worried. Although Lu Yidao and Qin Shi were experienced in fights of magical power, 2 fists were no match for 4 hands. Su Jingji's cultivation level was also ordinary. Although he was a descendant of a cultivation clan and definitely had several treasures, it was hard to say if he encountered a strong enemy. Murong Yan was the most worrisome. She never liked cultivating, and the reason her cultivation level was so high was all because she ate medicinal pills. Her own abilities were really mediocre. The 2 of them looked at each other in silence for a while. Murong Zi forced himself to smile. Junior Martial Brother Yi, I'll take advantage of you. Let me stay here too. My injuries really can't be healed in a short time, Mo Tiange nodded. This place isn't mine, anyone can come here. Senior Martial Brother Murong doesn't need to be polite. Murong Zi smiled, then began to meditate to heal his injuries. This place was very dangerous, so it was better for him to recover his spiritual aura as soon as possible. Chapter 65. Inside the poisonous fog, Mo Tiange and Murong Zi were meditating quietly. Their surroundings were quiet. This was a rare moment of peace in this mountain forest. Aside from this, battles were also going on in different places. Although this mountain forest was vast, there were always people who ran into each other. If one of the parties was Zixia sect, it would lead to a chaotic battle. Some people killed, and some people were killed. At night, for safety's sake, to vent their anger, the disciples from both sides gathered together to search for opponents who were alone and kill them to prevent themselves from being killed. Murong Zi seized the time to heal his injuries and restore his spiritual aura, while Mo Tiange was secretly on guard. Unlike her fellow disciples who came from cultivation clans and harbored hatred toward Zixia sect, she didn't want to get involved in any disputes. She just wanted to quietly wait for the exit formation to open and exchange it for a foundation-building pill. Suddenly, she sensed a spiritual aura fluctuation in the air. Mo Tiange opened her eyes. Just as she was about to look at the poisonous spring behind her, she suddenly felt a gust of wind. She promptly pushed Murong Zi away and rolled to the side. Her cautiousness saved 2 lives. In the next moment, the 2 of them widened their eyes and stared at the thing in front of them in astonishment. This demonic beast had a flat head, sharp teeth, and a bulging back like a small mountain. Its lower body was still in the poisonous spring, but the part that was exposed was enough for them to recognize what kind of demonic beast it was. Murong Zi muttered, "Second-rank demonic beast, iron-teethed crocodile. Turns out there really is a second-rank demonic beast here." Mo Tiange pulled him back and waved her hand, summoning formation flags. The place they were originally meditating was the 5 elements life and death formation she laid. As soon as the iron-teethed crocodile attacked, it entered the formation. Senior Martial Brother Murong, what's this? Murong Zi regained his composure and said with a frown, "This is a second-rank demonic beast, equivalent to an early-stage foundation-building cultivator. We're no match for it." Before they could say anything else, the iron-teethed crocodile dashed forward and opened its mouth to bite them. The 2 of them hastily retreated. Mo Tiange waved the formation flags, and the formation discs and flags she hid underground instantly stood up. The 5 elements life and death formation began to operate. The things around its body stood up with a paw sound. The iron-teethed crocodile seemed to be stunned for a moment. It blinked its small eyes, but its ability to think was not enough to understand what was happening in front of it. After pausing for a moment, it still rushed over, wanting to swallow the 2 little mosquitoes in front of it. But it failed. Vines instantly appeared beneath its feet and wrapped around its entire body, rendering it unable to move an inch. It angrily swung its tail, and the vines immediately broke. Cold sweat broke out on Mo Tienga's forehead. This demonic beast's brute force is too strong, my formation won't be able to hold it for long. This. Murongzi's complexion also turned pale. This bit of time isn't enough for us to run. Mo Tienga once again waved the formation flag. Water and quicksand instantly appeared inside the formation, rapidly turning it into a swamp, once again trapping the iron-teethed crocodile. At the same time, he gritted his teeth and said, "Senior brother Murong, I'll hold it back. You attack it. If we can't outrun it, we can only fight." Murongzi hesitated for a moment before answering, if we don't fight now, it'll be too late." Mo Tienga shouted, "Hurry up. I'll think of a way to hold it back so it won't attack you. You attack it as hard as you can." Infected by her attitude, Murongzi clenched his teeth and said, "All right. If worse comes to worst, we'll just fight it." 2 aura refining cultivators definitely couldn't defeat a foundation building cultivator, but a second-ranked demonic beast without the ability to think or use magic weapons might be able to put up a fight. Murongzi immediately summoned his flying sword, used the light body technique, and attacked. But in the next second, his complexion turned unsightly. His flying sword was a gift from an elder in his school. It was even infused with rare iron essence, so it was incomparably sharp. Usually, it had a lot of advantages in fights of magical power, but against this iron-teethed crocodile's thick skin, it unexpectedly didn't have the slightest effect. After the swamp couldn't hold the iron-teethed crocodile any longer, Mo Tienga once again waved her sword, causing a raging fire to appear inside the formation. At the same time, she took out a handful of bewitching flower seeds and threw them at the crocodile. Although the fire stopped the crocodile, the bewitching flower only made it wave its tail. With her current spiritual aura, the seeds she could use could only grow in a short period of time. However, second-ranked demonic beasts already didn't care about these kinds of seeds. With no other choice, she took out a handful of restorative panaceas. Using a formation to trap a second-ranked demonic beast consumed too much spiritual aura, so she had no choice but to consume panaceas to drag it down. On the other side, Murongzi wasn't someone with an undeserved reputation. Once he saw that his flying sword was useless, he immediately swapped it for something else, a whip that glittered with a golden light. As soon as he swung the whip, it turned into a streak of golden light, emitting a loud paw. But after he swung it, Murongzi's complexion changed again. This whip still couldn't break the iron-teethed crocodile's thick skin. After this happened a few times, Murongzi's complexion turned ashen. Not only was he unable to break the iron-teethed crocodile's defense, but his spirit tool was also damaged by its bite. As expected of an iron-teethed crocodile, its teeth were extremely sharp. Mo Tienga wasn't much better off. Although she was relying on the formation, her spiritual aura was being drained too quickly by manipulating this formation to resist the second-rank demonic beast's attack. She already felt that her spiritual aura was almost exhausted, so she had no choice but to grab a handful of restorative panaceas and stuff them into her mouth. With this kind of depletion speed, she was no longer afraid of wasting medicinal pills. If she couldn't survive, no matter how many medicinal pills she had, they would be useless. Use talismans. Use talismans to attack it. Mo Tiange shouted at the dumbfounded Murongzi. This iron-teethed crocodile had thick skin and thick flesh. The layer of hard skin on its body was comparable to armor, so she simply couldn't pierce it. She could only use spells to penetrate that layer of skin and injure it. Upon hearing her shout, Murongzi regained his senses. He took out a handful of talismans and, without any regard for the consequences, slammed them all onto the iron-teethed crocodile's head. These talismans contained spells of various elements. Sea of fire, ice, stones, quicksand, and vines, all of them smashed onto the iron-teethed crocodile's head. This time, the iron-teethed crocodile finally reacted. It raised its head and stared at Murongzi, who was flying in midair, with its small eyes. It then opened its mouth and sprayed a jet of water. Murongzi was greatly alarmed. He moved sideways with great difficulty to dodge, but he was careless and came in contact with some of the water. His body unexpectedly became sluggish and he fell to the ground. Taking advantage of this moment, Mo Tiange quickly took out the formation discs and formation flags for the disorienting formation and the spirit-trapping formation. She simply laid them down and soon after, she waved the formation flags. Vines once again appeared in the middle of the formation, firmly binding the iron-teethed crocodile. When the iron-teethed crocodile's attention returned to her side, it discovered that the spiritual aura inside its body had become slower. In a fit of rage, it couldn't care less about the other little bug and wanted to tear the bug in front of it to shreds. However, when it crawled forward, the scene in front of it changed. It actually couldn't find the existence of that little bug, so it immediately became confused. Seeing that Murongzi still hadn't crawled back up, Mo Tiange anxiously said, "Senior Marshal Brother Murong." As if he heard her voice, Murongzi struggled to stuff several medicinal pills into his mouth and crawled back up with great difficulty. He was already seriously injured, so it was already very difficult for him to use spirit tools and light body technique. However, he was also hit by the iron-teethed crocodile's jet of water. This was a poisonous spring, so everything in the surroundings was poisonous, let alone a demonic beast that advanced to the second rank in this place. The iron-teethed crocodile's poison was much stronger than the poisonous fog, so his injuries became even more serious. Ignoring everything else, Murongzi swallowed several healing pills to neutralize the poison and struggled to fly up. With a wave of his hand, a handful of fine flying needles flew towards the iron-teethed crocodile's eye. The iron-teethed crocodile blinked and swung its head. Some of the flying needles were flung away, while the other needles pierced the thick skin on its head. Without the slightest reaction, the needles fell down one after another. Murongzi didn't give up and continued to throw the needles. Inside the spirit-trapping formation, the iron-teethed crocodile's spiritual aura circulation became slower. In the end, the iron-teethed crocodile didn't manage to dodge the needles. With a pooh sound, its eye was pierced. It instantly became furious and let out a snoring sound while facing the sky. Mo Tiange was delighted. She immediately stuffed another handful of restorative panaceas into her mouth, then waved the formation flag. The sea of fire inside the formation smashed down, causing the ground to shake. After being attacked by several spells, the thick skin of the iron-teethed crocodile finally showed signs of being burnt. Murongzi didn't let this opportunity slip by. He once again took out his flying sword and stabbed it towards the burnt part of the iron-teethed crocodile's skin. This time, the sword stabbed solidly. It broke the iron-teethed crocodile's skin and pierced deeply into its flesh. Feeling the pain, the iron-teethed crocodile swung its tail and broke a big tree next to the spring. However, it still couldn't find where those annoying little bugs were. All it could see was the poisonous spring where it had lived for several hundred years. No matter how hard it crawled, it would always crawl back to its original spot. Blood flowed out of its eyes. Its body was in great pain from being hit by spells, and there was also something stuck in its flesh. It let out a painful grunt, but it still couldn't find those two little bugs. The only thing it could see was spells continuously smashing down on it. In the end, it couldn't hold on any longer. Another spell smashed down on it, and it could no longer open its eyes. Mo Tiange gasped for breath. Her legs went soft, and she could no longer stand and knelt down. There wasn't even a trace of spiritual aura left in her body. A second-rank demonic beast was indeed much stronger than a first-rank demonic beast. She could kill those dozens of demonic monkeys without the slightest danger using the 5 elements life and death formation, but this second-rank demonic beast. She spent so much effort and ate so many medicinal pills, yet she could only trap it. If it weren't for Murongzi's help, it would have died for sure today. Murongzi lay motionless not too far from her. Just now, he practically threw out all of his talismans. Once the iron-teethed crocodile died, he fell to the ground and couldn't get up. Mo Tiange was a bit worried. She once again swallowed a restorative panacea, barely recovering some of her spiritual aura. She then stood up with difficulty and dragged her heavy legs towards Murongzi. Senior Martial Brother Murong. Senior Martial Brother Murong. Murongzi lay motionlessly on the ground. There was a blood stain on the corner of his mouth. Obviously, he vomited because his injuries were too heavy. Mo Tiange clenched her teeth, took out a small reversion pill and stuffed it into his mouth. Right now, although she wasn't injured, her spiritual aura was completely exhausted. If any danger appeared in the short term, it would be troublesome. It was better to save his life first. After all, it would always be safer if the two of them were together. After feeding him the small reversion pill, Murongzi finally slowly regained consciousness. When he saw her, there was a hint of hesitation in his eyes. Junior Martial Brother Yi, the pills you gave me, Mo Tiange smiled bitterly. They were specially prepared for the sake of this trial. Now, I can only let Senior Martial Brother take advantage of them. She didn't dare to say she had another bottle on her. Although Senior Martial Brother Murong didn't seem like that kind of person and was Murong Yan's elder brother, they didn't have much of a friendship. Murongzi didn't doubt her. His expression changed as he earnestly said, "Thank you, Junior Martial Brother Yi. If it weren't for the medicinal pills you gave me, my injuries definitely wouldn't have lasted until tomorrow." Mo Tiange simply waved her hand. "If Senior Martial Brother Murong doesn't want to take advantage of me, you can just return the medicinal pills to me after we leave this place. Right now, I have to treat my injuries first. Otherwise, if we run into someone again." At this point, she suddenly wrinkled her brows. Someone was coming. Chapter 66. Mo Tiange shook her sleeves. Several things flew out and were buried in the soil. Soon after, she grabbed a few restorative spirit pills and stuffed them into her mouth. After doing these two things, the figures of a few people appeared in the poisonous fog. C.E. Mo Tiange immediately tightened her grip on her greenwood sword. Murongzi, on the other hand, endured the pain and stood up. There were a total of 3 people, all of whom were 10th layer Qi refining cultivators. The one in the lead was a middle-aged cultivator, a young man about 20 years old, and an old man about 50 to 60 years old. The 3 of them didn't seem easy to deal with. Since the middle-aged cultivator was the leader, he must have the highest status or the most powerful. The young man was able to reach the 10th layer of the aura refining realm at such a young age, so he must also have some skills. As for the old man, there was no need to talk about him. He had a lot of experience, so he must be the most cunning. When he and Murongzi glanced at each other, both of them smiled bitterly. He had just experienced a bitter battle, and he had actually encountered such a combination. The three men stood not far away, cautiously sizing them up. Both Mo Tiange and Murongzi secretly pretended to be indifferent and tightened their grip on their flying swords. After a while, the young man couldn't help but ask, "Senior brothers, what are we waiting for?" The old man frowned and slowly said, "Be careful." They all saw the corpse of the iron-teethed crocodile on the ground. Although it was already dead, there was still a huge pressure remaining. It was obvious that it wasn't a Tier 1 demonic beast, which caused them to hesitate. For two people to be able to kill a second-rank demonic beast, it was obvious that these two people definitely had extraordinary skills. However, they themselves were not to be trifled with, so they were unwilling to let it go just like that. It must be known that the corpse of a second-rank demonic beast could definitely be exchanged for a foundation-building pill. Caution, consideration, fanaticism, these expressions appeared on the faces of the three of them in turn. He was worried that his opponent would be too strong and lose him, but at the same time, he was unwilling to let go of such a great benefit. The corpse of a second-rank demonic beast could not only be made into a spirit tool, but it could also be made into a magic tool for foundation establishment cultivators. This was another huge fortune. The young man couldn't restrain himself and shouted, "Senior brothers, what are you hesitating for? Are we going to let them off for nothing?" The old man said, "These two aren't easy to deal with. Don't be rash." Finally, the two of them looked at the middle-aged cultivator between them. For a time, the middle-aged cultivator was also hesitant. He had no confidence in killing them, and he was unwilling to let them go. However, the two of them were looking at them with indifferent expressions, as if they didn't care about their decision at all. In fact, Mo Tiange and Murongzi weren't relaxed at all. Although Murongzi had taken a small reversion pill, healing his injuries wasn't something that could be done in a short period of time. Fighting while he was seriously injured repeatedly had already caused serious damage to his meridians. Right now, his expression remained unchanged purely because of his unswerving determination. Mo Tiange was the same. She was fully aware that they had just gone through a bitter battle and both of them were exhausted, so how could she not be nervous? However, she was no longer a child who hadn't seen the world. She had traveled extensively with second uncle and experienced many fights of magical powers in the past few years, so she knew she couldn't show weakness at this time. The middle-aged cultivator struggled for a long time before reluctantly saying, "Let's go somewhere else to take a look." The three of them turned around to leave. Mo Tiange and Murongzi secretly heaved sighs of relief. They really didn't have the confidence to fight them. Unexpectedly, the three of them suddenly stopped. The middle-aged cultivator sneered. "We were almost fooled by them. After killing a second-rank demonic beast, even if they weren't injured, how much spiritual aura would they have left?" Right after he said that, the three of them turned around and immediately split into three directions to flank them. Mo Tiange immediately slapped a defensive talisman on her body and released her greenwood sword. Murongzi's reaction wasn't slow either. Although he didn't have any talismans, he still had his spirit tool. The flying sword mixed with iron essence was extremely fast and flew out in a flash. The two of them struck first and gained the upper hand, catching their opponents off guard. The young man looked at the two flying swords flying towards him and momentarily panicked. These two swords were very fast, so they obviously weren't ordinary weapons. He had no choice but to dodge in a hurry. Mo Tiange stealthily shifted her position and threw out a large number of fire thorn seeds, temporarily trapping the young man. Just as she was about to tell Murongzi to deal with the old man together, she heard a muffled groan. She turned around and saw Murongzi clutching his chest while spitting out a mouthful of blood. The flying sword he was controlling was also swaying in the air. Mo Tiange was shocked. Senior Martial Brother Murong. The three of them were overjoyed. The young man was trapped and couldn't escape for the time being. The middle-aged cultivator and the old man glanced at each other, then simultaneously attacked. The middle-aged cultivator took out the most common spirit tool in the cultivation world, the flying sword, while the old man threw out a mirror. Mo Tiange hastily recalled her greenwood sword, but it only managed to block the mirror. The flying sword rapidly stabbed towards Murongzi, but Murongzi barely managed to dodge it. The flying sword brushed past his shoulder, causing blood to blossom. How could the middle-aged cultivator let go of this opportunity? He quickly flew towards Murongzi, caught the flying sword, and stabbed it towards him. Mo Tiange wanted to help, but the old man's mirror was really powerful. After being blocked by her, it flew back to the old man's hand. He immediately flipped the mirror over and a golden light shone towards her. Although she had a defensive barrier on her body, she didn't dare to block it, so she could only take back her greenwood sword to block the golden light. Right at that moment, the middle-aged cultivator had already closed in on Murongzi. Seeing that Murongzi didn't have any strength to fight back, the middle-aged cultivator revealed an evil grin and stabbed the flying sword in his hand. Pooh! The flying sword pierced deep into Murongzi's body. Blood flowed down the blade of the sword, but at the same time, the middle-aged cultivator let out a loud "ah" and let go of the sword to cover his abdomen. A flying sword pierced through his abdomen on his back. It was Murongzi's incomparably sharp flying sword mixed with iron essence. Mo Tiange's expression changed greatly, but she heard the other party shout, "Senior Marshal Brother Zhang." Murongzi and the middle-aged cultivator perished together, but the other party didn't look angry. Instead, they panicked. In just a short moment, one of them was trapped and the other was killed. The old man made a prompt decision. He put away the mirror in his hand, then immediately fled into the distance. Perhaps the reason he could survive until now was because he was timid. Mo Tiange didn't chase after him. Instead, she swung her flying sword, ending the middle-aged cultivator's life, then turned towards the remaining young man. Once the young man saw the old man fleeing, his expression immediately became very unsightly. He swung the large knife in his hand, chopping the fire brambles in half and attacking Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange had never met an opponent who used spirit tools to attack like a secular martial artist, so she couldn't react in time. Fortunately, she had defensive talismans on her, so she retreated while parrying with her greenwood sword. She wanted to counterattack, but she didn't have much spiritual aura left, so she could only retreat slowly. Seeing that she didn't dare to take his attack, the other party had a complacent expression on his face as he approached step by step. Mo Tiange suddenly smiled. A formation flag appeared in her hand and she waved it lightly. All of a sudden, with a "tpa" sound, the formation flags and formation discs that were hidden suddenly stood up. The young man turned pale with fright, but he was already bewildered by the scene in front of him. Yellow sand filled the sky. It was like a desert in the far west. Apart from that, there was nothing else. This was a formation she hastily laid just now. Originally, she wasn't sure if she could use it. Fortunately, this young man was an impulsive person, so she lured him into the formation step by step. Now that he was in her formation, he was naturally at her mercy. She waved the formation flag again, and the scene changed again. Spells of the 5 elements flew towards the young man in an endless stream. The young man brandished his knife to block them, but he discovered that these spells disappeared upon contact. They were simply illusions. He was so angry that he cursed loudly. Mo Tiange once again swallowed a restorative panacea, then grabbed a talisman. She controlled her greenwood sword and attacked the young man and the formation together. The young man thought it was an illusion again, so he didn't block them. He was immediately hit solidly and couldn't be more dead. Mo Tiange heaved a sigh of relief and withdrew her greenwood sword. When she thought of Murongzi, she hastily ran back. Senior Martial Brother Murong. She once again helped Murong Zi up from the ground. Mo Tiange discovered that his breath was already very weak. He was already seriously injured. The two of them encountered the iron-teethed crocodile, and after a thrilling battle, they finally killed it. Then, they encountered these three enemies. His abdomen was pierced through. He basically relied on his last breath to kill that middle-aged cultivator, but in the end, he couldn't hold on any longer and collapsed. Right now, his spiritual aura was exhausted, his meridians were damaged, and his dantian was also pierced through. He simply couldn't be saved. Murong Zi slowly opened his eyes and said with difficulty, "Junior. Martial Brother Yi." Mo Tiange nodded. "I'm here." Murong Zi spat out a mouthful of blood. Mo Tiange hastily supported him. She pressed her palm against his and channeled spiritual aura into his body. This made Murong Zi feel a bit better. He showed a faint smile and said in a weak voice, "I know. I can't hold on anymore. Please, do me a favor." Mo Tiange promptly nodded. "Senior Martial Brother Murong, please speak." Murong Zi pulled out his Qianquan bag with difficulty and gasped for breath. "In our clan, the one with the most hope is Xiaoyan. Please, give the demonic beast and the flying sword I killed to her." He closed his eyes and said, "As for the rest, I'll give it to Junior Martial Brother as a souvenir." As he spoke, blood kept flowing out of his mouth and he firmly held onto Mo Tiange's sleeves. Upon hearing his last words, Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. "Rest assured, Senior Martial Brother. I'll bring the things there." Murong Zi smiled, but his eyes were filled with unwillingness and sorrow. He finally loosened his grip, his head tilted, and he breathed no more. Mo Tiange was stunned for a long time before she regained her composure. Although she didn't have any friendship with Murong Zi, she still felt sad. This was the omnipresent death of cultivators. Not long ago, although Senior Martial Brother Murong was seriously injured, he was still talking cheerfully and full of confidence. But in the blink of an eye, he became a corpse. She wiped her face, erased this sadness, then stood up to clean up the scene. In any case, she had to continue living. Building her foundation, forming her gold core, forming her nascent soul, she had to live happily. First, she removed the Qianquan bags and weapons from the three corpses, then burned the corpses clean. She only put Murong Zi's ashes in a jade box. Soon after, she cleaned the bloodstains on her body and sorted the things in the three Qianquan bags. She used up a lot of her own medicinal pills and talismans, but fortunately, the two Zixia sect disciples still had some. All three of them had the corpses of demonic beasts on their bodies, but the other two only had 3 to 5, while Murong Zi had more than 10. After pondering for a moment, she took out a Qianquan bag and put all the demonic beasts the three of them hunted into it. She then put all the spirit tools on Murong Zi's body into the Qianquan bag. After all, she had gone through thick and thin with Murong Zi and was acquainted with Murong Yan. These spirit tools were useless to her, so she might as well return them to Murong Yan, that is, if Murong Yan was still alive. Soon after, she went to deal with the iron-teethed crocodile's corpse. This iron-teethed crocodile's carcass was a valuable material for refining tools. While she was cleaning up, she found the flying needles Murong Zi left behind. These flying needles were sparkling and transparent, almost traceless. They were indeed good for sneak attacks. She then put all of them into her Qianquan bag. After she finished sorting everything and replenished her spiritual aura inside the formation, Mo Tiange decided to leave the poisonous spring. That old man from Zixia sect had escaped, so who knew if there would be anyone else coming. It would be better for her to find another place to hide. Mo Tiange couldn't help but sigh when she turned around to look at the poisonous spring. Not long ago, they were talking cheerfully and wittily, but now, they were already a pile of ashes. Chapter 67. She entered the valley at 7 a.m. yesterday, so it was now 1:15 a.m. Mo Tiange calculated that she still needed 6 hours to leave the valley. A lot of things could happen in 6 hours, and a lot of people could die. She needed to be more cautious. The exit formation would be opened in the center, and the more central the area was, the more dangerous it would be. Mo Tiange thought for a long time before she decided to wander around the periphery. Once the formation opened, she would go to the center. Moreover, she had to use her divine sense at all times. Not only did she have to avoid people, but she also had to avoid demonic beasts. This was somewhat difficult, but it was still safer than staying in the poisonous spring. Who knew whether that old man from Zixia sect would call his fellow disciples or not? After all, the corpse of a second-ranked demonic beast was very attractive to aura-refining cultivators like them. In the east of this forest, there was a 300 feet tall waterfall. In the southwest, there was a high mountain. In the north, there was the cliff they came down from, and in the northwest, near the cliff, was the poisonous spring. The only way to leave this forest was to the northwest of the poisonous spring. However, the poisonous spring was an extremely dangerous existence. Not only were there demonic beasts that lived in groups, but there was also a poisonous fog that filled the air. There were also unknown dangers in the deep water, so no one would think of leaving from there. Therefore, nearly 1,000 aura-refining cultivators were in this forest. Even though this forest was very large and it wasn't easy to meet friends, it wasn't difficult to meet people. An hour after leaving the poisonous spring, Mo Tiange had already met several groups of people. What Murongzi said was true. The 3 groups had already formed teams to guard against danger and to kill enemies. In order to avoid these people, she spent a lot of effort. Her breath-concealing technique was only passed down from Yi clan's records, so it couldn't be considered brilliant. However, because the spirit-concealing jade pendant not only concealed her physique but also had spiritual aura-gathering and purifying effects, the effects of her spells were somewhat enhanced. Because she knew her limits, she was even more cautious. Whenever she sensed someone from afar, she would immediately avoid them. Along the way, she could clearly see the fierceness of the battle. More than once, Mo Tiange saw traces of fights of magical powers, charred trees, cracked ground, and congealed bloodstains. Every dark red puddle on the ground perhaps represented the end of a life. Sometimes, they would come across corpses that had not been disposed of. Some of them were dressed in purple, some in yellow, and some in green. The frozen expressions on their faces were all hatred and fear. Occasionally, she would see familiar faces. They were fellow disciples or sisters she had met in the sect. Fortunately, there weren't any fellow disciples that she could call friends with. Later, she gradually became numb to it. No matter what kind of marks she encountered, she could turn a blind eye to them. Nevertheless, despite being so careful, she was still discovered by the 2 Zixia sect disciples. With the greenwood sword guarding her side and several talismans in her other hand, Mo Tiange discreetly observed her surroundings. Among the 2 people besieging her, one was a robust man whose physique wasn't inferior to Lui Dao's, and the other was a beautiful young married woman. The young woman was in the 10th layer of the aura refining realm, and the burly man was in the 9th layer of the aura refining realm. Moreover, both of them seemed to be very experienced in fights of magical powers. One in front of the other in the back, they blocked her way. The surrounding trees were very dense, and the 2 directions that the 2 of them were blocking were the easiest points to break through. Mo Tiange couldn't help but frown. It seemed escaping was impossible, so she could only kill them. However, these 2 people had silently surrounded her, so they might not be easy to deal with. She had to think of a way to deal with them. After sizing her up, the robust man uttered an and said, "Wife, this brat seems to be the one Old Man Chin mentioned." Old Man Chin. Mo Tiange pondered for a moment. Could he be the old man from Zixia sect who ran away from the poisonous spring? However, she didn't expect the two people in front of her to be husband and wife. This young married woman's cultivation level was high and she was beautiful, but she actually chose such a crude man whose cultivation level wasn't obvious as her Dao companion. Mo Tiange couldn't help but glance at the young married woman. The young married woman saw her face and said with a smile, "Husband, it's not like you don't know that Old Man Chen has always been timid. However, this little brother is quite handsome. What a pity." Upon hearing the young married woman praising another man's handsomeness, the robust man grunted with dissatisfaction. "Wife." The young married woman seemed to be very proud of her husband's jealousy. She covered her mouth and laughed for a while before saying, "Husband, what are you afraid of? No matter how handsome he is, won't he still die in our hands?" The robust man felt her words were reasonable. He chuckled and said, "Wife, you're right." He then turned towards Mo Tiange and glared at her. "Brat, hand over your life." Right after he finished speaking, Mo Tiange had already made her move. Her greenwood sword swiftly shot forward, but it was a feint. The raging flame talisman in her hand, which was hidden under the light of greenwood sword, flew out of her hand. The robust man was about to attack, but his initiative was seized. He immediately became furious and brandished the spirit tool in his hand, aiming to hit greenwood sword. His spirit tool was a huge iron wheel, which seemed to fit his body shape perfectly. He was quite confident in using his spirit tool to fight against Mo Tiange. Unfortunately, Mo Tiange's real killing move wasn't on her spirit tool. Greenwood sword retreated after being hit. After the iron will repelled greenwood sword, it still fiercely rushed towards Mo Tiange. At the same time, the young married woman behind her also opened an umbrella and threw it at her. Mo Tiange didn't panic. The raging flame talisman had already arrived. With a loud bang, the robust man let out a blood-curdling scream. Just as the iron wheel and the umbrella were about to reach her, Mo Tiange's figure suddenly disappeared into thin air. In the next moment, Mo Tiange appeared in front of the robust man. She thrust the greenwood sword in her hand, ruthlessly stabbing the robust man's chest. The robust man let out a shrill scream before he suddenly fell to the ground, no longer breathing. "Husband," the young married woman screamed and rushed over. Mo Tiange used light body technique to jump and avoid the umbrella. She was able to successfully launch a sneak attack this time because her cultivation level was one layer higher than the robust man's, but the robust man still underestimated her. Pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger was indeed the most useful trick in the cultivation world. This young married woman seemed to have deep feelings for her husband. When she realized her husband was no longer breathing, she angrily rushed towards Mo Tiange, wishing she could tear Mo Tiange's body into 10,000 pieces. Nevertheless, Mo Tiange didn't plan to fight her head-on. Her enemy had obviously lost her mind, so she didn't want to die together with her. Talismans and spirit tools were continuously thrown at her. Mo Tiange only dodged them by relying on light body technique. It wasn't until the other party was obviously so angry that she couldn't control herself that Mo Tiange threw the greenwood sword, talismans, and a handful of seeds at her. Seeing that Mo Tiange was using the same method to deal with her, the young married woman was furious. She patted a defensive talisman on her body and used the umbrella to block Mo Tiange's attack. Her other hand grasped a handful of talismans and was about to throw them at Mo Tiange. But she didn't have the chance. Before she could throw the talismans, she felt pain in her body. The hand holding the umbrella powerlessly slipped and she fell to the ground. After confirming that the two people were dead, Mo Tiange collected their things and dealt with their corpses. She didn't stay for even a moment and ran away. This fight of magical power seemed to go very smoothly. In just a moment, she finished dealing with the two people, but in fact, her losses weren't small. In order to deal damage to that burly man, she had used up 5 or 6 flame talismans, which was equivalent to dozens of spirit stones. Moreover, she had also used a priceless invisibility talisman, which second uncle had spent a lot of money to buy. She killed the young married woman while she was panicking. It seemed like she used the same method she used to attack the burly man, but in fact, she mixed the talismans with the sparkling and translucent flying needles left by Murongzi. That was why she was able to silently break through the young married woman's umbrella and defensive barrier. Although she had a lot of experience in fights of magical power, this was the best time she had ever achieved her predetermined goal. She made a decision in a split second and immediately attacked without making any mistakes. In the blink of an eye, she gained the upper hand. Mo Tiange carefully reviewed this fight in her mind. She was in a calm and focused state, grasping all the details in her hands, making the most correct decision in a split second and hitting the target with one strike. She wanted to remember this feeling. This was the best state for fights of magical power. Someone else was in front of her. Mo Tiange turned around, but she didn't run far before she sensed several people's breaths not too far from her. She had no choice but to restrain her breath, find a tree, jump on it, and hide herself. The first group to pass by was a mixed group of people from Jindao School and Yunwu sect. Mo Tiange didn't plan to go out and greet them. With so many people together, it would be very easy for them to be discovered, and it would also be easy for them to fight. Although it would be safer with more people, more disputes meant more chances of death. These people passed by very quickly. Mo Tiange pondered for a moment and decided not to come down. Instead, she continued to sit on the top of the tree with her breath restrained and took out the Qiankuan bag she obtained just now. The seeds in her hands were already used up, but there were still a lot of talismans and medicinal pills in the Qiankuan bags of these Zixia sect disciples. There were also several good spirit tools. However, for aura refining disciples, spirit tools that hadn't been refined by themselves weren't easy to use and could only be used as backups. In addition, the flying needles left by Murongzi were quite useful. Controlling these flying needles required divine sense rather than spiritual aura, so aura refining cultivators couldn't use 2 spirit tools at the same time. If these flying needles were used well, very few aura refining disciples would be able to defend against them. After putting away the things that were useful for fighting, Mo Tiange jumped down from the tree and continued to move forward. She hadn't gone far when she was startled. There were a lot of corpses on the ground. There were disciples from all 3 cultivation groups. When she saw the faces of those dead Yunwu sect disciples, she realized that they were the ones who just passed by. As it turned out, they actually ran into another group of Zixia sect disciples and perished together. Mo Tiange shook her head and collected these people's Qiankuan bags. She then set a fire and burned all the corpses. On her way here, at least 50 to 60 people had died, and there were still many places she hadn't been to. She was afraid that after 4 hours, less than half of the people would be able to leave this place alive. Thinking up to this point, she couldn't help but sneer. Zixia sect probably didn't expect this, right? Merging Yunwu sect and Jindao school resulted in the loss of countless high-level aura refining disciples. Among these people, they were the group of aura refining disciples with the highest hopes of building their foundation. As a result, the number of foundation-building cultivators in the next 100 years would be greatly reduced. They wouldn't be able to become the 8th cultivation group. On the contrary, their strength would be much weaker. Therefore, she wasn't the least bit afraid of being punished for killing people. Because at that time, they would discover that they couldn't afford to lose aura-refining disciples. Chapter 68. In the dense forest, a figure was flying. She didn't stop until she couldn't sense the breaths of other cultivators behind her. What bad luck! Tiange covered her chest with her hand. She felt the aura inside her body surging and felt very regretful. It was all because she was too careless. She thought she was very safe after laying a formation in her hiding place. As a result, the spiritual aura fluctuation of the formation was discovered by a group of people from Zixia sect, who planned to surround her. She was able to escape this time thanks to the several escape talismans she had and the formation that helped her resist for a while. Otherwise, if she had to face 5 or 6 people who were coming at her aggressively, she probably wouldn't even have ashes left. Her aura was a bit unstable for a while after she used the escape talisman forcefully in the encirclement. She swallowed an aura-nourishing pill and looked up at the starry sky. It seemed to be the hour of the yin now. There were still more than 2 hours left before the exit formation would open. With the fierce melee, there were fewer and fewer people alive and more fighting scenes. Along the way, all she encountered were corpses, not people. Thinking of this, Tiange shook her head and smiled bitterly. She didn't care about what happened to other people. It was good enough that she could save her own life. At this moment, she felt the aura inside her dantian was still unstable. She hesitated for a moment and finally found a tree with luxuriant branches and leaves. She jumped on it and restrained her aura completely. She didn't lay a formation, nor did she use her divine sense. She just quietly adjusted her aura. Although she wasn't seriously injured, if she didn't adjust her aura, it would be very disadvantageous for her if she encountered an enemy again. She didn't want to use the escape talisman again to escape, lest a minor injury turned into a serious one. As time passed, no one came to this place. It seemed that there were indeed not many cultivators alive in the forest. Tiange sighed inwardly. After experiencing several life and death battles, she felt more and more indifferent. Even death couldn't easily move her. Perhaps, after seeing it many times, she felt it wasn't a big deal. There were so many deaths on the path of cultivation. If she didn't get used to it, how could she go further on the road to immortality? She was glad that she could adapt so quickly. Her aura gradually stabilized, and she breathed a sigh of relief. There seemed to be a demonic beast nearby. She could vaguely hear its roar, but obviously, no one wanted to catch it now. The more people died, the more likely it was for the survivors to obtain the foundation-building pills. Moreover, killing others and directly obtaining the spoils of war was much faster than slowly killing them one by one. Even she herself had obtained many demonic beasts that were killed by others. The 2 cultivators she killed in the poisonous spring, the husband and wife who besieged her, and the group of people who perished together with her, in addition to the 20 to 30 demonic monkey corpses on her body, she basically didn't need to take out all of the demonic beast corpses to obtain a foundation-building pill. Therefore, she didn't want to cause any trouble. Just because she was used to death did not mean that she would kill. As long as others did not offend her, she would not make a move. Thinking of this, she smiled bitterly. Sure enough, he had become a cold and heartless person. All of a sudden, the sound of light footsteps entered her ears. Tiange opened her eyes. She didn't use her divine sense, so she didn't notice him until he came close. Then, through the branches and leaves, he vaguely saw several pairs of feet. It seemed like there were 3 people, 2 men and a woman. The woman's footsteps were staggering, which was very strange. She tilted her head but didn't move. She continued to hide. In a situation where she couldn't even protect herself, it was better not to meddle in other people's business. The voices of these people came from below. Big brother, why did you walk for so long? This voice was very young and sounded very impatient. Another voice, which was slightly lower, answered, how would I know? Hey, stinky girl, you're not lying to us, are you? Cough, cough. The woman's coughs rang out. Mo Tiange couldn't help but frown. This voice. Senior Martial Brothers, why are you so anxious? Can't you sense the demonic beast's spiritual aura? That demonic beast is guarding that vermilion heart fruit tree. It was Murong Yan's voice. This answer seemed to have been muddled. The younger one said, what you said seems to be reasonable. As the footsteps gradually faded away, Mo Tiange muttered to herself for a moment, then quietly slipped down from the tree and quietly followed them. The cultivation levels of these two male cultivators couldn't be considered high. One was in the 8th layer of the aura refining realm, while the other was in the 9th layer. They actually survived until now and were even together with Murong Yan. Moreover, based on their conversation, it seemed they wanted Murong Yan to take them to find some vermilion heart fruit. She had never heard of this kind of spiritual fruit. Could it be some kind of mystical fruit? Mo Tiange shook her head and denied this idea. If it really was some kind of mystical fruit, Murong Yan should have gone to pick it a long time ago. Why would she wait until now? She must have been caught by these two men and used those words to deceive them. Mo Tiange quietly approached them and carefully observed the situation. Sure enough, Murong Yan's hands were tied and her body was injured. The two male cultivators were Zixia sect cultivators. One was in his 20s while the other was in his 20s. They soon found the demonic beast's location. Soon after, she saw the two men fly into a rage and pull out their spirit tools. Stinky girl, you actually dared to deceive us brothers. However, Murong Yan was also very quick-witted. She desperately dodged to the side and cleverly startled the demonic beast. She then hid behind the two men and the demonic beast pounced on them. This demonic beast was a first-rank giant ape. Although its cultivation level wasn't obvious, its skin was thick and its flesh was extremely strong. For a moment, the two men's hands and feet were tied down by it. Seeing this, Murong Yan quietly retreated. Taking advantage of the fact that the two men weren't paying attention, she hastily ran backwards. Big brother, this whore wants to run. The younger one fiercely stared at Murong Yan's back. The older one used his spirit tool to block the giant ape's attack and shouted, chase after her. She actually deceived us. We can't let her run away. All right. The younger one withdrew his spirit tool and chased after the giant ape. After barely blocking the giant ape's attack once again, the man muttered, this won't do. She's too strong. It seems I have to use a treasure. With that thought in mind, he took out a pigeon egg-sized purple ball from his robe and threw it at the giant ape. With a loud boom, the giant ape was instantly blasted into a bloody mess. The rocks and trees in the vicinity were all blown away, raising the area within a radius of 30 meters to the ground. The man felt a bit of heartache as he watched the bloody mess. There wasn't a single piece of flesh left on the ground. It was unclear whether he was feeling heartache for the corpse that couldn't be pieced back together or the treasure he used. After feeling heartache for a while, he clenched his teeth and turned around to chase after his younger brother. However, he only ran a few steps when he heard his younger brother's miserable scream. Startled, he hurriedly ran forward. Third brother. Third brother. Before long, he found his younger brother lying on the ground and there was no one around him. Mo Tiange pulled Murong Yan and ran madly. She only stopped when she could no longer sense that person's breath. Murong Yan looked at her gratefully. Junior Martial Brother Yi, thank you. Fortunately, I met you. Otherwise, Mo Tiange shook her head and said with a smile, Senior Marshal Sister Murong, you don't have to be so polite. It was nothing. She paused for a moment then asked curiously, Senior Marshal Sister, what happened? Mo Tianga's question made Murong Yen smile bitterly. She shook her head and said, it's all because I didn't like cultivating before. This time, I really suffered a lot. I ran into Zixia sect's disciples several times, but every time, I narrowly escaped. Later, I ran into them. They wanted to kill me, but I lied to them that there was a strange plant here. Sure enough, it was like that. Mo Tianga nodded. What was that thing in that person's hand? How could it be so powerful? About that, I'm also not very clear. Spirit tools don't seem like spirit tools, and magic weapons don't seem like magic weapons. It seems to be a kind of special object refined from the soul of demonic beasts and a lightning spell. Once it's thrown with spiritual aura, it will explode. Its power is extremely powerful. From what I've seen, no one can withstand it. This was Mo Tianga's first time seeing this thing. Its power was indeed enormous. Perhaps no aura-refining cultivator could withstand it, so she chose to run. After all, she didn't want to lose her life. When she saw Murong Yen, Mo Tianga couldn't help but think of Murong Zi. She hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she still decided to think about it after they got out. Danger was everywhere now. If she suddenly found out that her elder brother had died, she was afraid her emotions would fluctuate and affect the fight of magical powers. Mo Tianga asked, Senior Marshal Sister Murong, what do you plan to do next? Upon hearing Mo Tianga's question, Murong Yen showed a bitter smile. I won't hide it from Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Before I came here, I was full of ambition and was determined to fight for a foundation-building pill. Only now do I realize that I didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. I don't have any regrets now. I just hope to get out of here safely. In the future, I'll cultivate diligently before thinking about other things. Mo Tianga nodded inwardly upon hearing what Murong Yen said. It seemed Murong Yen really understood. This was good. Murong Zi's painstaking efforts weren't wasted. Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Murong Yen hesitated for a while but in the end, she still shook her head. Forget it. We'll talk about it if I can get out of here alive. I'll take my leave first. Mo Tianga was stunned. Senior Marshal Sister Murong, you're not coming with me. Murong Yen suddenly turned her head. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you don't mind coming with me? Mo Tianga was dumbfounded for a moment before she finally reacted. Could it be that Murong Yen thinks I won't be willing to go with her? Mo Tianga immediately smiled and said, what do you think, Senior Marshal Sister? Upon seeing Mo Tianga's expression, Murong Yen smiled embarrassedly. I was thinking too much. The two of them smiled at each other. The estrangement caused by the changes in the school during this period of time instantly disappeared. Murong Yan's expression was no longer stiff. Instead, she looked a little more relaxed. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, I really underestimated you in the past. I never expected that your spells would actually be this powerful. I was indeed too lazy before. Mo Tianga teased her. Senior Marshal Sister, it's good that you know you're lazy. I know my innate talent isn't good, so I have no choice but to work hard. She looked at the starry sky again. It was already the hour of the morning. There's still 2 hours left. Senior Marshal Sister, we can get closer to the center. A hesitant expression appeared on Murong Yan's face. Are we going now? There should be a lot of people going to the center. Shouldn't we avoid them? Mo Tianga said, rest assured. We're close to the opening of the exit. Everyone wants to leave, so they definitely don't want to cause trouble. It'll actually be a bit safer than before. What Imo said was reasonable, so Murong Yen finally decided to believe her. She said straightforwardly, "Then I'll let Junior Marshal Brother Yi decide." "I'll go with you." Imo nodded. "Senior Marshal Sister, how are your injuries? Are you okay with hurrying along?" Murong Yen said, "They're fine. They're just minor injuries." Since Murong Yen was sure, Mo didn't hesitate. "Then let's go." The two of them used the light body technique and hurried towards the center. The closer they got to the center, the more people there were. Murong Yen felt very uneasy. She asked in a low voice, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, are you really okay?" Mo pulled her hand and gave her a smile. "I'm fine. Trust me." Murong Yan's face suddenly turned red. In the end, she nodded. Mo however, didn't notice. She was still holding Murong Yan's hand and rushing towards the exit. Chapter 69. There was a huge open space in the center of the forest. Many cultivators from the three groups had gathered around the open space. They were all staring at each other with vigilance. Mo arrived with Murong Yen. Everyone's gaze fell on them, but no one dared to make a move because they were afraid of breaking the balance. Although there were many Zixia sect disciples present, everyone cherished their lives. The disciples of Yunwu sect and Jindao school also didn't dare to make a move when they were obviously at a disadvantage. Otherwise, it would be too much of a loss if they lost their lives before killing their enemies. Without caring about these people's gazes, Mo found a corner close to her fellow disciples and pulled Murong Yen over. Seeing that the two of them were motionless, these people moved their gazes away from them and stared at the newcomers. Mo cautiously scanned the surroundings. Sure enough, Zixia sect's main branch suffered heavy losses. There were less than 100 people present. Including those who hadn't arrived yet, there were probably no more than 200. There were about 60 to 70 people from Yunwu sect and Jindao school. All of them were covered in blood and had fierce gazes. Among the people she knew, only Jiang Shangheng was present. Obviously, he had also experienced a bitter battle. Now, he found a place to meditate. As for the others, Qin Shi, Lu Yidao, and Su Jingji, none of them were present. Mo frowned slightly. She was a bit worried. Based on the number of people present, perhaps more than half of the cultivators died this time. She really couldn't be sure that those three people were still alive. At that moment, Murong Yen gently pulled her sleeve and whispered, "Junior Marshal Brother Yi." Seeing her pale face, Mo showed a comforting smile. "Don't worry." In this place, Murong Yen knew that her methods and insight were inferior to Mo so she obediently listened to her. Mo looked up at the sky. The sky was already turning white. It was almost dawn. Once dawn arrived, the exit formation would appear here and they would be able to leave. Mo picked up a clean patch of grass and pulled Murong Yen to sit down. She seemed to be meditating and adjusting her breath like everyone else, but in fact, she was secretly observing the surroundings. She believed that many people present were as vigilant as she was. At the last moment, no one wanted to throw their lives away. Another group of Zixia sect cultivators arrived. Mo swept her gaze over them and frowned. She found that the old man who ran away from the poisonous spring was among them. However, she did not intend to take any action. Firstly, even though they had fought once, there was no enmity between them. Secondly, once she made a move, the balance would be broken. She still wanted to return alive. The old man also noticed her, and a look of surprise flashed across his face. Then, like her, he pretended not to see her. Presumably, many of the people present did the same. Revenge could be taken in the future, but it was not worth it to pay with their lives. More and more people came. When it was almost dawn, a few cultivators would come out of the forest from time to time and find their own camps. There were also enemies who appeared together, but they glared at each other angrily and did not make a move. Just when everyone was anticipating the opening of the formation, a loud shout suddenly rang out, "Damned girl, I've finally found you. Return my brother's life." Soon after, a figure pounced towards Murong Yen. Mo Tiange wrinkled her brows. She pulled Murong Yen up with one hand and used her greenwood sword with the other to block the opponent's attack. When he took a closer look, he discovered that it was the elder brother of the pair of brothers who had just captured Murong Yen. Oh no! Mo Tiange turned around to look. Sure enough, the atmosphere in the field changed. Everyone's gazes fell on them. Many people had already secretly taken out their spirit tools. She was extremely furious. This blockhead! Just now, when she heard the conversation between the two brothers, she already thought they were stupid. It seemed there was something wrong with their brains. She immediately took out an earth-splitting talisman with her other hand and threw it at him. Although this blockhead was slow, his reaction wasn't slow. He somersaulted and dodged her attack. Their actions ignited the atmosphere in an instant. Several Yunwu sect disciples wanted to help, so Zixia sect side immediately took action. As a result, the two sides had already started fighting before they could arrive. Mo Tiange had no time to deal with the chaos. She looked up and saw that the blockhead had taken out a pigeon egg-sized purple ball and was about to throw it at her. She was instantly shocked. Murong Yan's complexion was even paler. They had seen the power of this thing with their own eyes. Once it was thrown, they definitely wouldn't be able to resist it. Seeing that the other party was about to throw the purple ball, Mo Tiange hurriedly took out a high-grade defensive talisman and slapped it on the talisman. A defensive barrier immediately appeared and covered the two of them. Boom! A deafening sound rang out, followed by the screams of other cultivators. Mo Tiange moved her spiritual aura, preparing to resist it. But in the next moment, the incoming force was easily blocked by her. Ha! She opened her eyes and was dumbfounded. Qin Shi gnashed his teeth and shouted, "Why are you in a daze? Come and help." He raised a sword, poured his spiritual aura on it, and stood in front of them. Mo Tiange felt as if she had just woken up from a dream. She hastily moved her spiritual aura to share part of the impact. After a while, the spiritual aura pressure finally subsided. Seeing that they actually blocked it, the blockhead shouted angrily and wanted to rush towards them again. Since she almost lost her life, how could Mo Tiange be polite to him? She immediately used an ice-condensing talisman. Murong Yen also didn't stay idle. She also rushed forward with her spirit tool. Qin Shi released a raging flame art. Although the blockhead's abilities weren't low, he couldn't withstand the three people's joint attack. In order to dodge the ice-condensing talisman, he was hit by Qin Shi's spell. His movements were a step too slow, so he was immediately hit by Murong Yan's spirit tool. He staggered and fell to the ground. Seeing that he was completely dead, the three of them heaved sighs of relief. The power of this purple ball was indeed extraordinary. Aside from them, the people around them were also caught in the crossfire. Some people were even badly mutilated by the explosion. Only a few people managed to block the impact. The dead and injured were all disciples of Yunwu sect and Jindao school. Although the instigator was already dead, each and every one of them was furious. They raised their spirit tools and rushed towards the Zixia sect disciples. Zixia sect disciples also had the advantage in numbers, so how could they be willing to show weakness? They also rushed forward. Spells and spirit tools were flying everywhere in the sky. Junior Martial Brother Yi. Qin Shi waved at them after dealing with a sneak attack. Mo Tiange was on guard as she pulled Murong Yen closer to him. Senior Martial Brother Qin, thank you. Don't thank me so quickly. He took out a bunch of talismans as if they were free and gave them to the two of them. Hold on for a while. The exit will open in about a quarter of an hour. Mo Tiange also knew that this wasn't the time to be polite. She took the talismans he handed her, then turned around and threw a raging flame talisman at the Zixia sect disciples who were rushing towards them. This battle royale had the largest number of participants since the start of the day and night. It was also the most intense one. Spells, talismans, and spirit tools were flying everywhere. It was hard to tell whether they were on their own side or the enemy's side. They couldn't even dodge and could only use spells and talismans to resist. In the end, the three of them had no choice but to stick a defensive talisman on each of them to resist all kinds of attacks. Eventually, a white light shone in the center of the open space. This white light became brighter and brighter until it slowly formed the shape of a formation. It was overflowing with light and vibrant colors, and it was full of spiritual aura. Everyone's gazes were attracted by the formation. Even the fighting stopped. In a flash, everyone rushed towards the formation like a swarm of bees. Mo Tiange intentionally retreated a bit, but the people behind her also rushed forward. A group of people rushed towards the formation in a chaotic manner. Soon, they were squeezed into the formation. The scene in front of them changed. Mo Tiange raised her head. With a glance, she saw the three core formation cultivators with ashen complexions. Disciples came out of the cliff one after another. Almost every one of them was covered in blood and looked miserable. Some of them were even seriously injured. Murong Yen, who was next to her, leaned towards her and whispered, "Junior Martial Brother Yi, will we?" Mo Tiange shook her head and whispered back, "Don't worry." Although these core formation cultivators had ashen complexions, they didn't have any killing intent, so they probably wouldn't attack them. Besides, after the last battle royale, perhaps only 1/3 of the original disciples would come out alive. If they still had to be punished, they might as well recruit new disciples. Once they left the murderous environment and didn't need to be vigilant, Mo Tiange felt exhausted all over. Her body tilted and she almost fell down. But when she turned her head, she saw Murong Yen staring at the formation with rapt attention. Mo Tiange's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly remembered she hadn't told him about Murong Zi. "Senior Martial Sister Murong," Murong Yen answered softly but didn't look at her. She was still staring at the formation. Mo Tiange took a deep breath. She suddenly hated herself for telling such cruel news. "In fact, I met Senior Martial Brother Murong." Upon hearing this, Murong Yen suddenly turned her head. Mo Tiange clenched her teeth and said, "Senior Martial Brother Murong has passed away." Murong Yen was dumbfounded. She seemed to be in disbelief, but soon, her face gradually turned pale. She suddenly grabbed Mo Tiange's hand and said, "Junior Martial Brother Yi, can you say that again?" Mo Tiange sighed and repeated, "I met Senior Martial Brother Murong. He's already passed away." Murong Yan's face turned pale, but she didn't let go of her hand. Instead, she stared at Mo Tiange and asked, "Junior Martial Brother, do you have any proof?" This time, Mo Tiange didn't say anything. She just handed Murong Zi's Qianquan bag to her. Murong Yen took it with trembling hands and opened it eagerly. When she saw those familiar spirit tools, she finally looked sad and let go of her hands to cover her face. Although she wasn't responsible for Murong Zi's death, he died while they were fighting against the enemy. Mo Tiange felt very uncomfortable seeing Murong Yen so sad. Qin Shi patted her shoulder and shook his head. He seemed to be comforting her that this wasn't her responsibility. She forced a smile, but she didn't feel any better. Senior Marshal sister, don't be sad. Senior Marshal brother always wanted you to build your foundation. You. At this point, she couldn't continue speaking. How could a few dry words of comfort compare to the sadness of losing a loved one? After a long time, Murong Yen finally put down her hands. There were no tears on her face. Her face was pale and her expression was gloomy. She used to be a charming and lovely girl, but after a series of blows recently, she was no longer as bright and beautiful as before. I'm sorry, Junior Marshal Brother Yi. It's not that I don't believe you, but I understand. Mo Tiange took out a jade box and handed it to her. This is Senior Marshal Brother Murong's ashes. Senior Marshal sister, don't be too sad. The dead are gone, so you should live better. Murong Yen accepted the jade box and the Qiankuan bag. A sad smile appeared on her face as she said, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, please tell me how my big brother died. Mo Tiange said, Senior Marshal Brother Murong and I happened to run into each other. He was attacked by someone and was seriously injured. While he was still recuperating, we ran into a second-rank iron-teethed crocodile, then we ran into 3 other people. In the end, Senior Marshal Brother Murong couldn't hold on any longer and died together with one of them. Mo Tiange simply explained, but she was still worried and emphasized, Senior Marshal sister, don't think about revenge. This hatred can't be settled. How could Murong Yen not understand this? It was just that she always felt unwilling. After a long time, she reached out to wipe the remaining tears on her face and said with a determined expression, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, don't worry. I'm no longer the insensible me from before. I know what I should do. Soon after, she laughed self-mockingly and said, although we weren't biological siblings, Big Brother always doted on me. No matter what I wanted, he always thought of a way to get it for me. Now, he thought of a way to get me foundation building pills, but I never expected the price would be his life. Chapter 70. The development of the matter was just as Mo Tiange expected. The person who came up with this idea originally thought it would be an opportunity for the disciples of the 3 groups to communicate, but he didn't expect it would turn into an opportunity to kill each other. Because of this, the nascent soul grandmaster of Zixia sect flew into a rage and almost killed the person who came up with this idea. However, it was already a long time before these aura refining disciples learned about this. On the day they finished their test, the 3 core formation grandmasters were livid. After hearing the disciples' reports, they sent several foundation-building disciples to clean up the mess. These foundation-building disciples found some seriously injured aura-refining disciples and also reported the tragic situation left behind in the mountain forest. Soon after, the core formation grandmasters discussed something, but they didn't say anything. They just took them back to the sect and ordered them not to go down the mountain. After Senior Marshal Brother Zhou inquired about it, he told them not to worry and finally appeased some people. During this test, their courtyard lost a lot of people. Mo Tiange's house was considered good. Out of 5 people, 4 came out alive. The one who didn't come out was Su Jingji. Lu Yidao was seriously injured, but in the end, he still survived. Su Jingji, on the other hand, disappeared. No one knew who killed him or where his body and ashes were. There was no trace of him. In this disaster, many people disappeared like this, but they didn't expect Su Jingji to be one of them. After receiving confirmation, Su clan's people came to clean up his things. Thus, Su Jingji's traces completely disappeared from this house. Soon after, the sect head announced the results of this test. Just as they guessed, there was no investigation or disposal. Instead, he directly announced the distribution of foundation building pills. In this test, no more than 100 Yunwu sect disciples came out alive, but 40 of them obtained foundation-building pills. Reportedly, because the elite disciples suffered heavy losses, the nascent Soul Grandmaster of Zixia sect decided to distribute more foundation-building pills, hoping to produce more foundation-building cultivators among them to make up for this loss. The 4 people in Mo Tianga's house, including Murong Yan, were among them. However, this news didn't make Mo Tianga happy. Murong Zi's death and Su Jingji's disappearance made her feel unprecedentedly lost. She remembered Su Jingji's irritable appearance before the test that day. In fact, she had a bad premonition that day, but she didn't think too much about it. She never expected it would be an eternal farewell. Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Mo Tianga, who was leaning against a tree, raised her head and saw Qin Shi standing in front of her with a wine bottle in his hand. She forced a smile and took it. Qin Shi also sat down next to her, and the two of them drank in silence. It was an autumn afternoon. The sunlight seeped through the leaves and shone on the body, making people lazy and unwilling to move. The surroundings were quiet, and only the distant waterfall added a little liveliness. Thinking back to a month ago, there were 8 people chatting here, a group of people ordering her around. But now, Su Jingji was dead, Lu Yidao was seriously injured, Wang Qianyi was married far away, Shen Bing used her beauty to seduce people, Murong Yan was determined to cultivate assiduously, and Senior Marshal Brother Zhou was busy with his future. The only one who could come here and sit with her was Qin Shi. Senior Brother Qin. If you build your foundation, what will you do? Of course it's to continue cultivating. Why do you ask? Mo Tianga shook her head. She couldn't tell why she was feeling so vexed. I just don't understand, what's the purpose of cultivating in the end? What was the purpose of cultivation? 80% of the people in the cultivation world would answer this question without hesitation, to live a long life. But what was the purpose of living a long life? Fighting each other like this, causing countless deaths and injuries. For the sake of living a long life, why didn't they care about life at all? Qin Shi thought about it seriously, but he didn't answer. He just shook his head and slowly talked about something irrelevant. I was born in a noble family in the secular world. However, because I was from a branch family, I was never valued and was always bullied by others. I don't know why, but ever since I was a child, I felt that I was different from others. I didn't want to fight for favor with my brothers, and I didn't have any interest in playing. I only focused on studying. When I was 8 years old, a guest came to our manor. He was said to be our ancestor, and he seemed to be an extraordinary person. He was already several hundred years old, but he didn't look old at all. In front of him, even the most dignified clan master didn't dare to utter a word. Then, I was brought to him. After he tested my spiritual roots, he told the elders that he wanted to take me away. At that time, I was still young and didn't know what I was looking forward to. I just suddenly felt that maybe this was the path I wanted to walk. At this point, he turned around and smiled. Sure enough, my premonition was correct. I walked on a completely different path from my brothers in the manor. I'm still young now, but those brothers and sisters of mine have already turned into dust. Why do we cultivate? I can't answer this question. For me, cultivating is a natural part of my life. I don't need to ask why. I just want to walk on this path. His quiet narration made Mo Tianga feel very calm. His experiences had also allowed her to see herself in him. Just want to walk on this path. Is that it? She pressed her forehead and said in a low voice, I don't know why I walked on this path. I was young and intelligent, so I knew how to read people's faces. I was used to the fickleness of human nature, and I always felt pain in my heart. At that time, I only hated myself for knowing these things and why I couldn't be like other children. Later, when I met second uncle, I realized I was really different from other children. Cultivation. I also don't know why, but second uncle told me that without strength, there's no freedom. Without strength, there's no freedom, she murmured and repeated. His gaze on her suddenly had a lot of complicated feelings. Mo Tienge threw the bottle of wine away after she finished it. In fact, she never drank because she wasn't in the mood and didn't have the chance. Second uncle didn't drink because he said that cultivators couldn't indulge in worldly things, so she also thought the same. However, this feeling of drinking wine made her feel very comfortable. Senior Marshal Brother Chin, that elder of yours should have left you by now, right? She paused but didn't say anything. In fact, second uncle's lifespan is almost up. If it's not this year, it'll be next year. Sometimes I think I can accept it calmly, but sometimes I find it hard to imagine. If second uncle is gone, what should I do? If I'm like senior Marshal Brother Su, suddenly disappearing without even saying goodbye, what should I do? She hugged herself and buried her head in her arms, not daring to continue. She wanted to pat her shoulder, but he hesitated and his hand didn't fall. In the end, he said, I'm different from you. In fact, my aptitude isn't the best, but I've never encountered a bottleneck in my cultivation. Great-grandfather said that maybe I was born to cultivate, so I don't have any obsessions or ties. In other words, I don't have superfluous feelings. I can't understand how you feel, but I know you have a heavy attachment to your feelings. If you can't let go, you won't have any achievements in the future. Mo Tiango was stunned. Obsession, she sighed and finally patted her shoulder. This is all I can say. Whether you can do it or not, it's up to you. Cultivation. Maybe for you, there are a lot of things you have to give up. Mo Tiange thought hard. Obsession. Because I've longed for too much since I was a child, I have an obsession. She seemed to understand, but she was also a bit confused. She handed her another bottle of wine. Don't think too much. If you could figure it out so easily, it wouldn't be an obsession. This requires fated chances, so take your time. After drinking another bottle of wine, her head became even more dizzy. In a daze, she heard Shi teasing her. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you've never drunk wine before. Who drinks it like water like you do? In a daze, Mo Tiange raised her head and saw that there seemed to be several Qin's eyes swaying in front of her. She tilted her head and reached out to hold his head. Senior Marshal Brother Qin, what's wrong? Do you know? Phantom technique. She was stunned for a moment, then he burst into laughter. In the end, he laughed so hard that he hit the ground. You. If I knew this earlier, I would have made you drink earlier. Unexpectedly, Mo Tiange stared at him for a while then stood up and walked unsteadily towards the water. Shi shouted from behind her, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, what do you want to do? She was still swaying as she walked. Wash my face. She walked to the edge of the pool and crouched down. When she saw her reflection in the water, she was suddenly stunned. She hadn't paid attention to her appearance for a long time. Today, she finally realized that it was very different from what she remembered. Her originally sparse eyebrows now had eyebrows, the outline of her face seemed to have deepened, and her cheeks were plump. She already had the appearance of an adult. Although her head was still muddled, she was still frightened because her face looked more and more like a woman's. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, are you done? Hearing the voice behind her, she hurriedly held the water to wash her face, but the face she saw was still bright and beautiful. She was afraid she would discover her, so she didn't dare to look back. She panicked and thought, could it be that someone has noticed me? Junior Marshall Brother Yi. Her foot slipped, and she suddenly lost her balance and fell into the pool with a plop. Junior Marshall Brother Yi. This scene made Qin Shi dumbfounded. After a while, he saw Mo Tiange struggling in the water, so he finally regained his composure. He sprang up and instantly grabbed her, who was floating in the water, and went back to the shore. He couldn't help but shake his head. Junior Marshall Brother Yi, you've really drunk yourself silly. As a cultivator, you actually drowned. Where's your light body technique? He looked down and felt even more helpless. This wasn't just an ordinary kind of silly. She actually choked on water and fainted. Qin Shi put Mo Tiange down under the tree. He thought for a moment, then raised his hand. In his hand was a bright-colored peach branch. The peach blossoms were still blooming, and there was dew in the center of the stamen as if they had just been plucked from the tree. He muttered a few words in a low voice. Finally, he waved his hand and shouted, "Go!" Soon after, the two of them disappeared into thin air. From Qin Shi's point of view, the two of them were still in their original place. It was just that there was a faint light barrier surrounding this small area. He lowered his head to look at the unconscious Mo Tiange. A thoughtful expression appeared on his face. After a long time, he stretched his hand to her wet neck and felt around. Soon, he pulled out a jade pendant strung with a red string. It was a round jade pendant with a warm color and clear cloud patterns. He sighed. Sure enough. Chapter 71. When Mo Tiange woke up from her sleep, she felt a splitting headache. She propped herself up. The room was dark, so she rubbed her head in a daze. Strange, how did I fall asleep? She sat up and circulated her energy to cultivate a small circle. Only then did her head stop hurting. She also slowly remembered what happened before she fell asleep. No, it should be before she got drunk. How shameful. She never drank before, yet she tried to drown her sorrows with alcohol. The worst thing was that she actually forgot herself after getting drunk. She groaned and fell back. Fortunately, there was only Senior Marshall Brother Qin at that time, so no one saw Senior Marshall Brother Qin. She hurriedly sat up and touched her body. Fortunately, her clothes were intact, and the psychic jade pendant was still there. She breathed a sigh of relief, but she felt a bit regretful. She didn't remember what happened before she got drunk. She only vaguely remembered that Qin Shi told her to let go of her obsession to continue on the path of cultivation, but she felt like she forgot something. She thought for a long time, but she really couldn't remember, so she simply ignored it. Since she couldn't remember, it wasn't important. What was important was that she had to warn herself that she couldn't relax her vigilance like this again. Fortunately, Qin Shi didn't do anything to her. Otherwise, her secret might have been exposed if it was someone else. With this thought in mind, she got out of bed to freshen up. She then took out several moonstones from her Qianquan bag and threw them on the bed. The room instantly became bright. Although her clothes were intact, they were wrinkled and smelled of alcohol. Mo Tiange frowned and walked to the washstand in the corner. She then took off her coat and wiped her face. When the smell of alcohol dissipated, she took out her new clothes and put them on. She was about to untie her hair and comb it again when she suddenly saw her reflection in the bronze mirror. She froze. She thought for a moment, picked up the comb, scattered her hair, carefully parted it, and coiled it into a bun. During this process, her hair was combed crookedly several times because of her rusty technique. When she finished, she couldn't help but smile bitterly at herself in the mirror. She hadn't dressed as a woman for almost 10 years, and she didn't even know how to comb her hair. The person in the mirror was unpleasant no matter how she looked at it. She then scattered her hair again and combed it into an ordinary Daoist bun. However, the face in the mirror was still too handsome for a man. After thinking for a while, she rummaged through her chinkuan bag and found a few things. First, he used a long black strip to thicken his eyebrows. Then, he poured out some gray powder from a jade bottle and smeared it on his nose, the corners of his eyes, and his lower jaw. Now that she looked at the person in the mirror, she noticed that he had sharper facial features and thicker eyebrows. He looked more like a man. He carefully erased some of the traces before putting the items away. These 2 items were actually smithing materials. But since they weren't poisonous, it wouldn't matter if he used them to wipe his face. The most important thing was that the foundation building pill was right in front of him, so he had to be a bit more careful. Once she was done with everything, she returned to the bedside and took out her chinkuan bag from inside her robe. She tidied it up, then sat down cross-legged to cultivate. Actually, she had gained many things from this trial. Just the corpses of the demonic beasts were already a great fortune. There were also pills, spirit tools, and all kinds of materials. Just the spirit stones alone amounted to over 1,000 pieces. Mo Tiange felt quite conflicted after she returned. Working hard for several years wasn't as good as killing a few people. Fortunately, she suppressed the injustice in her heart in time. If she ignored this ruthless thought, it would lead her to become a devil in the future. Unknowingly, several hours passed. The sky outside was already bright. Mo Tiange withdrew her spiritual aura, jumped out of bed, tidied up her clothes, opened the door, and walked out. Outside the hall, Qin Shi was sitting in his usual position, drawing talismans. When he heard her voice, he didn't even raise his head. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you finally woke up. Thinking about yesterday, Mo Tiange felt a bit uneasy. Seeing that his expression wasn't abnormal, she finally felt relieved and said, "What's wrong?" "To get the foundation building pill." Qin Shi put away his brush and paper. When he turned his head, he was stunned. His reaction made Mo Tiange a bit nervous. Was the makeup on my face too obvious? After a while, Qin Shi shook his head. "I'm really muddle-headed. I feel like you're a bit different today, but I can't see what's different." Mo Tiange felt a bit relieved. She smiled dryly. "How could it be? Aren't we getting the foundation building pill? Let's go." Qin Shi nodded. The 2 of them walked out together. While walking behind them, Mo Tiange secretly wiped her sweat. Originally, the 4 of them always moved together in this room. Now that Su Jingji wasn't here and Louis Dao was being treated by the foundation building seniors in the North Peak because of his serious injuries, this room suddenly became a lot more deserted. If this wasn't the case, Qin Shi wouldn't necessarily be so close to her. It was only because the others were gone that they had no one to talk to except each other. The south peak of Mount Yunwu was still the same as before. The morning light shone faintly and a cool breeze caressed their faces. However, 2 of the people who used to travel with them were missing. Mo Tiange sighed softly. When they reached the steward's hall, there were already a lot of people waiting in line. The 2 of them obediently waited outside. Soon, it was Mo Tiange's turn. She walked in and handed over her identity tablet. After the identity tablet was verified, she left a spiritual aura imprint on another jade slip before she cautiously took a jade bottle from the steward's martial uncle and carefully put it away. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this was the lifeblood of aura refining disciples. The other disciples who received the foundation building pill were all ecstatic, but she was still relatively calm. When Qin Shi also received the foundation building pill, the 2 of them went back together. "Senior Marshal Brother Qin, you've reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm for quite some time, right? Do you want to enter closed door meditation immediately?" "I should. What about you, junior martial brother. I'd better wait for a while. I haven't reached the peak stage of the aura refining realm yet. It won't be too late to enter closed-door meditation after I'm a bit more confident. That's good too. After they returned, Mo Tiange and Qin Shi went back to their respective rooms. Mo Tiange stayed in her room for a while before she opened the door again, preparing to go down the mountain. After receiving the foundation building pill, this matter was officially over. The prohibition against disciples leaving the monastery without permission was also lifted. She naturally had to go down the mountain to see second uncle first. However, since she just received the foundation building pill, she was afraid she'd be targeted by others, so she pretended to come back to pack her things before setting foot on the road down the mountain. She first went to Yunwu Sect's shop to exchange the spirit stones she consigned for medicinal pills. She also sold the demonic beast corpses she obtained this time. During this period of time, there would be a lot of people selling demonic beast corpses, so she wasn't afraid of being too conspicuous. On the other hand, when the shop assistant saw the pile of corpses, he felt great admiration. This assistant was also a disciple of Yunwu sect, so he naturally knew about the competition this time. Since there were so many demonic beast corpses, the person who obtained them must be someone with superb skills. Therefore, he didn't dare to be negligent and respectfully gave her the spirit stones. Mo Tiange took the bag of spirit stones. She didn't count it and just threw a spirit stone as a reward. After that, she returned to second uncle's small courtyard after making many turns. Second uncle. A cough came from inside the room. Mo Tiange pushed the door open and saw an old man with a face full of wrinkles on the bed. She revealed a smile and said, "Second uncle, I'm back." Yi Jiang raised his eyelids and looked at her for a long time with his cloudy eyes. He then coughed and said with a hoarse voice, "Xiao Tian, you're not injured, are you?" "I'm fine." Mo Tiange hastily shook her head and sat on the small stool beside the bed. She then took out the jade bottle containing the foundation building pill and said happily, "Second uncle, look. I got the foundation building pill." Seeing the jade bottle, Yi Jiang took it with trembling hands. He opened the jade bottle and sniffed it. He then closed his eyes and nodded. "Yes, this is the foundation building pill." "Xiao Tian, you've worked hard." Mo Tiange repeatedly shook her head. "I'm just lucky. There was an accident in this test, so it was much easier to distribute the foundation building pills." Yi Jiang showed a loving smile and looked at her with pity. "Do you think second uncle doesn't know what happened?" "You. Forget it. It's good that you came out alive." His reproachful tone was actually warm and caring. She held second uncle's already withered hand and smiled sincerely. "Second uncle, you don't have to worry. I'm very powerful now. I diligently cultivate every day and I've also learned how to fight against others. I won't be soft-hearted anymore. Second uncle, I'm telling you, in this test." After spending 2 hours, Mo Tiange rambled on about what happened in this test. Yi Jiang smiled as he listened. Sometimes he praised her for her calmness in handling things, and other times, he gave her careful pointers, telling her how to handle things better. Mo Tiange felt she gained more from this conversation than she did from her own experience. With this thought in mind, she felt a bit depressed. If it wasn't for second uncle, what would she do? When she finished talking, Yi Jiang sighed and said, "Xiao Tian, you've really grown up from the way you handled things this time." Second uncle is relieved. Even if you can't build your foundation this time, you're still young. It shouldn't be a problem for you to try a few more times. His words were like his last words. Mo Tiange bit her lip, grabbed second uncle's hand and whispered, "Second uncle, how could Yi Jiang not know what she was thinking?" He smiled and stroked her head. "Don't be like this. You're already an adult. You don't need second uncle by your side. If you form your gold core one day, go back to the Yi clan in the secular world and see if there are any descendants with spiritual roots. If there are, you don't need to rebuild the Yi clan. You can just pass down cultivation techniques. Second uncle, she shouted angrily. Yi Zhang's expression turned serious and he said sternly, Xiao Tian, it's not that you don't have to face it if you don't mention it. You have to remember that you're a cultivator, and a female cultivator at that. If you can't even accept reality, how can you go on? It's much more difficult for a female cultivator to achieve something than a male cultivator. Your aptitude isn't outstanding, and you don't have any clan elders to rely on. If you don't have a firm heart, you might as well give up early. Second uncle had never spoken to her in such a harsh tone. Mo Tiange was stunned. She lowered her head but didn't say anything. Yi Jiang softened his tone. Do you still remember what second uncle has taught you all these years? You don't have good aptitude and you don't have a backer, so you have to be stricter with yourself. You can't be weak, you can't be greedy, and you can't indulge in emotions. You have to remember that weakness and passion are the enemies of female cultivators. Not only today, but you also have to calmly accept second uncle's death. If you fall in love with him in the future, you have to restrain yourself. You have to know that people are fickle and the world is unpredictable. How could she not know this? But Yi Jiang once again closed his eyes and revealed a calm smile. Life and death are part of the heavenly Tao's reincarnation cycle. You and I are both cultivators, so we should understand the principle that the heavenly Tao's cycle is endless. Cultivators, and only when you cultivate the heavenly Tao can you become a true immortal. Go back and carefully comprehend it. When you can calmly face second uncle's death, you can come see me again. Mo Tiange was silent. After a long time, she finally gave him the medicinal pills, bid him farewell, and left. Weakness and passion are the enemies of female cultivators. The heavenly Tao's cycle is endless. Only when you cultivate the heavenly Tao can you become a true immortal. Mo Tiange stood in the courtyard and closed her eyes for a moment before she resolutely walked out. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.